This is the November 7th, 2023 regular meeting of the Chatham County, Savannah Metropolitan Planning Commission. The board consists of Ms. Karen Jarrett, Chairwoman, Mr. Travis Coles, Vice Chairman, Mr. Wayne Noah, Secretary, Ms. Lorraine Bowles, Treasurer. Board members are Mr. Dwayne Stevens, Ms. Elizabeth Epstein, Mr. Joseph Irvine, Mr. Tom Wildwoody, Mr. Jeff Nortricia, Mr. Shredrick Coleman, Ms. Tracy Amick, Mr. Joseph Welch, Mr. Michael Kagler, and Mr. Jay Melder. The MPC Executive Director is Melanie Wilson.
The meeting of the Chatham County, Savannah Planning Commission will come to order. Oh, thank you. With me. Thank you. We'll pause for an invocation and then proceed immediately into the Pledge of Allegiance. You can stand. Thank you. Dwayne?
Bow our heads, please. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the opportunity to be able to gather with one another to make decisions and progress the community along. We ask that you ensure that we make decisions considering all individuals that will be impacted. We ask that you impart a spirit of collaborativeness and collaboration, and we ask that you keep everyone under the sound of my voice safe and without harm. Amen.
Amen. Thanks, Twin.
I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Please be seated. For staff, petitioners, and members of the public who are participating, our procedures will be as follows. The agenda is broken down into several parts. First, notices, proclamations, and acknowledgments. Next, the consent agenda, which consists of items for which the applicant is in agreement with staff recommendation and there are no known objections. This will be followed by regular business, old business, and adjournment. For each agenda item on the regular business, the staff will make a presentation. The staff presentation will be followed by a presentation by the petitioner should they elect to do so. The petitioner will be allotted a time frame of no more than 20 minutes. The board may then ask questions of the petitioner or staff for clarification. Afterwards, the floor will be opened for public comment. If you wish to comment on an item that the board is considering at the time, members of the public that are in person must fill out a blue speaker card and give that to staff. If you are participating virtually, use the raise your hand feature on your screen. Do not use the feature until the item you want to comment on is being considered. At the appropriate time, you will be recognized and staff will unmute your microphone. At the end of your allotted time, as determined by the chair, your microphone will be muted and the chair will recognize the next speaker. The total public comment time will be equivalent to the petitioner's presentation time. Therefore, it is important that you use the raise your hand feature during the hearing on that item. If you want to speak on a petition, once the floor is closed for public comment on a petition, no additional public speakers will be allowed. If you are not certain you want to speak, still use the raise your hand feature or fill out a card. And you will be given the option to decline when your name is called. After public comment, the petitioner will have the opportunity for rebuttal and then additional needed questions by the board. Finally, the board will take action. All right, our first agenda item is to the approval of the agenda.
Calls motion to approve the agenda.
No, a second.
We'll do a voice vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? There are no notices, proclamations, or acknowledgements. There are 3 items requested to be removed from the final agenda. The first is a map amendment request to rezone from R2 EO to BN EO. at 202 Shipyard Road. The second is a special use request to have a place of worship within RSF 6 zoning district at 1202 East 69th Street. And the third is a special use request to have a place of worship within the RSF 6 zoning district at 1202 East 69th or 68th. I have two different dates or two different. Okay. Is there anyone here for those items? All right. Do I have a motion?
Cole's motion to remove items 1 through 3 from the final agenda.
Noah second.
All right. Voice vote, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay. There are 2 items requested to be withdrawn. No, there are no items requested to be withdrawn. On the consent agenda, there is the approval of the September 26, 2023 meeting minutes and the MPC 2024 holiday schedule. Does anyone want those removed, or do I have a motion?
Cole's motion to approve the consent agenda.
Noah second.
Voice vote, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Old business. We have a map amendment, 9 parcels on East Broad Street, Gwinnett Street, and East Bolton Street.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the board, Edward Morrow, Development Services Director. So we are going to be looking at a petition that has matriculated through our agenda over the course of this year and hopefully take some steps forward today. This is a request for a small PUD that is located at the intersection of East Broad Street and East Gwinnett Lane. Just to offer kind of a broad overview, because again, it is a somewhat dense matter of discussion. I'm first going to talk about kind of the nature of the request, the rezoning evaluation criteria, the requirements of the small PUD, evaluation of the submitted general master plan, evaluation of the submitted PUD text, and then I'll provide some additional information and finally the staff recommendation. So just to summarize the request for you, again, this is a request to rezone the subject properties from the TC2, Traditional Commercial 2 zoning district, to the proposed small PUD or small plan development district. Within the proposal are 2 mixed-use buildings, a north building consisting of approximately 29,500 square feet of footprint, and a south building that is approximately 16,000 square feet. With ground floor commercial uses, proposed is a maximum of 185 residential units, specifically apartments. Even though the unit mix is not actually specified at this point, we understand it is likely to be studios, 1 and 2 bedrooms. Up to 10,000 square foot of the proposed buildings are intended to be used in association with commercial tenants. Currently, the parking count is unknown, and also there are waivers to use, development, and procedural standards that are requested in association with this. Again, because this is a planned development, this is a request that kind of sits aside from the adopted zoning ordinances and asks for a combination of development standards, procedures, and uses that ideally are not necessarily well assimilated, but it is worth noting at this juncture that the petitioner has the ability to achieve a similar development under the current TC2 zoning designation, albeit at a lower density and intensity of use. Here is an image of the updated concept. This is the architectural site plan. If you recall, before the building extended all the way to this easternmost property line. In work with the city's fire department and some of the other reviewing departments, there have been minor adjustments that have been made, and so we see a reduced building footprint at this point. So the principal takeaway from this is to see that there is now fire access around the building. It is staff's understanding that everything that you see here that is not building footprint is intended to be dedicated as public right-of-way for circulation, principally for fire use on this side. Again, this is the proposed 29,000 square foot northern building and the 16,000 square foot southern building. And I don't fancy myself a designer, but I thought it would be a useful illustration in kind of conceptualizing what it is that the traditional commercial district is attempting to accomplish within the structures here. Using this approximately 10,000 square foot theater across the street, these boxes represent 10,000 more or less square foot buildings. So within the footprint of this 130,000 square foot building, you can fit completely two 10,000 square foot footprints. And admittedly, this one is just a little bit smaller. And I will say that this actually opens up the opportunity to create a little bit of public realm. This should likely be something like green space. It's probably not wide enough to be something that could be traversed by vehicles. But again, within this kind of environment, the idea is that we would be creating vibrancy, which most often is associated with creation of the public realm itself. So this is what the actual current zoning district is attempting to produce. And that leads into the original rezoning criteria. As a part of the PUD, we still consider whether or not the rezoning itself is actually appropriate. And so at this point, I'd like to make sure I enter into the record the staff report, which discusses all of the typical rezoning considerations. Interestingly here, the small PUD development calls out a few other things, compatibility, resource protection, and design review. All of these things taking into account the idea that what is proposed should not necessarily take away from what has been there. If it is a contributing resource or some other item that is of natural, scenic, or historic importance, and also it should generally fit within the context of the neighborhood. So this type of rezoning, again, even though we are looking at the things that have been submitted, we need to keep in the forefront of our minds. Is this actually more appropriate than what it is that would currently be allowed there? And so with regard to resource protection in particular, I will highlight the fact that this is the historic church that once sat on this property that you can see here. And also just to highlight the fact that this is a pedestrian environment. So this is not envisioned to be an extension of downtown. It is envisioned to be a neighborhood scale town center. So at some point, what we should be seeing are uses that would activate and safely activate the public realm, continue to be safe for pedestrians, while also sort of adding commercial and residential uses up top. So moving into the actual SPD requirements. In evaluating an SPD, there's kind of a bifurcated process, the first part being the general development plan review, and finally the final master plan. And a concurrent review was not requested by the petitioner, and so this is step one. This is the general master plan review that is being looked at today in concert with the actual proposal to rezone, the appropriateness of rezoning. A concurrent review is possible if it is desired. So in looking at step one, section 6.1.17 identifies items A through R that are required to be submitted. And so those are the items that I'll briefly sort of go through with regard to the petitioner's submission. The next juncture, at the point that this moves forward, would be consideration of the requirements of 6.1.18, which closely approximates an actual specific development plan review. And I just want to note for the board at this juncture that it is important that any deficiencies be addressed before this petition move forward, because advancement to step two represents, in essence, a specific development plan review. And there's considerable expense that is incurred by a petitioner in order to develop grading plans, photometric plans, detailed landscape plans, things of that nature that are required during the second step of this review. So again, we should ensure that we are duly satisfied with all of the first step requirements identified in 6.1.17. So to succinctly kind of go through these, there are three principal things that I think are worth noting. We did spend some time in the last meeting that this was heard talking about the context, talking about what was appropriate and what's envisioned for this area of town. And so this is a greenfield development. The one historic structure that was there is now gone. So there are no requests that are being made in association with preservation of that. It's a greenfield development. Everything that is created is new. This site does not sit within any of our district boundaries. It just happens to be adjacent to town. And so a PUD typically would have some sort of theme, if you would. It would have some sort of justification. Uses would be unique for the purpose of combining them and creating something that is outside of what the zoning ordinance already permits. And so it's staff's opinion that first and foremost, there was not enough of a justification for why a PUD was required when all of the requested uses are possible within the current zoning designation. The other two items relate largely to traffic. First, there was inadequate parking detail that was provided and no trip generation data or traffic impact data that was submitted. And again, I'm only addressing the items that were actually deficient. Items that you see here in red, I kind of addressed before. There were things that were inadvisable. Staff for administrative and sort of the ongoing care and maintenance of administering an ordinance takes issue with some of these things, again, because they begin to mix standards and processes that have been adopted by the city council. And rarely, I think, is there ever a need, again, with the exception being where there's appropriate justification for departure from those. In reviewing these, staff again did confer with city departments. There are a couple of things that I'd like to bring to your attention. Again, staff concurred with all of these things, but I'm bringing these particular emails forward just so that you can see these are not MPC staff concerns. These are also city staff concerns. So with regard to the PUD text itself, again, this first comment here from the City of Savannah's planning manager within Bridget Liddy's department, he states that in essence, there are some concerns about sort of this mixing of uses and requests that there be a tie back to a base zoning district. Just because, again, once you start to mix things and assign things different use requirements, it becomes difficult to administer. Another one, there are provisions in essence that may not necessarily have any effect on the development itself, simply because it's a PUD. So the expectation is that what it is that is presented is what is to be built. So everything within it should only point to, in essence, maintenance, right? It's a small PUD. There should be no future subdivision of the parcels because the density that is approved is based on the land in its current gross form. If it's 1.4 acres at the time of rezoning, the density that is requested is based on that land area. And so once you begin to subdivide and recombine and do different things, you have in essence sort of tampered with the original approval. So again, it kind of defeats the purpose of planned development. Basically, what you see is what you get. So again, we're seeing that there are standards in there that actually do not address things that are current on the site. So there are references to fence and wall requirements. While currently there are no fences or walls, of note also is the fact that there are references to rooftop trellises, which understandably could be used in association with future residential uses, but those were not discussed as part of working with staff to this point. City of Savannah staff also felt that generally a lot of signage was allowed. There was an additional portion of sign verbiage that was added since the last meeting. It is inconsistent with what the city currently allows, and also of note, if you have ever, the one example that sticks out in my mind is Liquorland, how they have the window size advertisements. This could potentially permit window size advertisements. So just these little care and maintenance type things that say, we've already gone a great deal to establish signed ordinances and procedures, variance procedures. It is much more prudent to tie them to the established procedures rather than to allow them to move forward and associated with something that may or may not be justified. Finally, the last note said that they need to state, which the text aspects, exhibits A and B. Okay, so when we get to the very end of the PUD document, there are images that again are expected. There are elevations, there are perspectives, things of that nature. When you look at other parts of the body of the PUD document, there are historic district references. And so again, this is a building that when you look at what has been submitted, the expectation is that the building that will be built in the future is the building that you see in exhibits A and B. And so again, when you have historic district standards that actually are referring to some other future development, that is inconsistent, and it just creates an administrative issue as to what is it that the board is approving. Is it some future development, or is it the pictures that are actually being presented in association with the proposed development itself? So I will circle back to that. Traffic engineering's concerns, again, I actually tried to speak to Michelle, but she was kind enough to still provide her comments. Traffic, even though they concurred with the new right-of-way dedications that were to happen, there were still several questions in essence about processing time, adequacy of parking, what would happen if someone wanted to unload groceries or something of that nature. So just kind of the basic mechanics that, again, there were no parking details that were provided other than the one screenshot that was provided within the report. So we're still unclear on the actual capacity. We're unclear, other than the 13 on-street spaces that are between the two buildings, what other parking is actually available. So just a lot of loose ends. Staff did go back to the August 2018 petition for Starland, which is on Bull Street. And so at that time, 4M did actually put forth a proper set of plans related to the parking structure that was proposed. And so from these images here, you can see the very tight configuration of the City Lift system. This references City Lift. Again, that is one particular, provider of this type of parking structure. We are not confident that that is the particular system that is proposed to be used. Again, the site plan only references quote unquote structured parking. So the specifications of it, any of the specifics of how this thing actually functions, staff was not provided with those details. But the petitioner and the agent came before this board in August of 2018, making a similar request for a approval of a general development plan, and provided this much detail at that time. So finally, we received notification of support from the Victoria Neighborhood Association, and so that prompted kind of this curious research into discussions of housing affordability. At the initial meeting that was held with the neighborhood, I do recall that housing affordability was mentioned. Again, we received the letter from Victorian Neighborhood Association, but there were no discussions with staff in the course of all of our time working together with regard to housing affordability. And so Laura McKinnon from Housing Savannah was kind enough to provide answers to some questions. The current deficit, the city is looking at a housing deficit at all levels of approximately 9,300 units. So there is definitely a need to address the housing shortage. That much is conceded. Again, and they said that those earning between 30% of AMI to 120% of AMI for the Savannah area were indicated in the majority of those that were surveyed. How is it that the share of affordable units and rate relative to AMI are selected and negotiated? She said that while there is no hard and fast rule, the general rule of thumb appears to be a minimum of 10% of the total number of units to be at 80% of AMI or less in order to qualify for LIHTC funds or low income housing tax credit funds. Current tracking method with regard to workforce and affordable housing. Right now, there is no established method for tracking it. But again, these are typically enforced through deed restrictions and affordability covenants. And so covenants are one of the items that are listed as a requirement under the very next step. So at some point, if such an arrangement has been entered into by the petitioner in the city, we would expect to see that at the next hearing for an approval or review of the final master plan. The last question, insights on how arrangements are typically made and enforced. So even though the city does not yet have a policy, there is one in development. Nonetheless, such arrangements are happening on a case-by-case basis. So anyway, I just kind of wanted to provide that additional information because it is something that was, put to the board as a conditional measure of support from one of our community groups, our established community groups. And I just wanted to make sure that there was adequate information to make a good decision. So this is an AMI chart that can be found on Housing Savannah's website. And finally, with that, staff does recommend denial of the request to rezone because there are uses currently for the property that are appropriate for the way that it is currently zoned. The requested proposal in its current form is likely to be more detrimental to the neighborhood and its existing character. If, however, the commission is inclined to support the proposal, all of the proposed non-residential uses and associated use requirements should be aligned to the TC2 zoning district. The site is located within an area that is broadly TC2, and so reference to those requirements is more than appropriate. All procedures for amendment should be aligned to the relevant sections of Savannah's zoning ordinance. So again, if there are any variances to be requested, if there are any adjustments to the site plan to be made, again, there are appropriate measures for addressing those. Finally, all development standards other than setbacks, lot coverage, height, and the appearance standards that are actually established in pages 13 through 17 of the PUD. So you will recognize these as the actual pictures at the very end of the PUD. Those should be the items that govern how it is that the PUD functions. The images that you see, the perspectives, the sign, the proposed, this was actually one of the items that I can say the petitioner responded to. They created a master sign plan, which I felt was very tasteful. The signs were appropriate size. So when you're looking at the end of the document and you can kind of see where signs are proposed, that is something that the petitioner did respond to and later added additional verbiage that is inappropriate from staff's perspective. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Can we hear from the petitioner first, and then we'll come back to questions?
Absolutely. Okay. One, two. Okay.
My name is Robert McCorkle from the law firm McCorkle, Johnson, McCoy. Here on behalf of the petitioner, I apologize for my voice and my slowness of speech. I have a little bit of congestion cold today. If you'll bear with me a little bit. As was mentioned by staff, this property is made up of 9 parcels, about 1.4 acres total. Makes up essentially an entire city block except for a church that's on the rear of the property. Again, in the staff report, I don't know what y'all received separate from what was posted online, but what was posted online didn't include any maps or pictures or anything of the site. And so I want to make sure that everybody's got context about what we're talking about. So I want to start by just talking about both the site and why we believe this was a good site for our project and for the increased height and density. This is a map of downtown. I want to turn this, which I'm not sure if I know how to do this. Edward, do you know how to turn this without me? Because it's all going to be sideways. Thank you. Okay, perfect. Thank you. I'm going to have to go all the way around. Okay, so this is a plat of downtown, a satellite image of downtown. And when we originally looked at this site, which is over in this location, over where the black square is here, along the eastern boundary of East Broad Street, which forms a boundary around the historic districts going through the downtown district, Victorian, as well as Mid-City. On this side, there's a similar boundary going down the MLK and Montgomery corridor that bounds the city down the length of those historic districts. Over the years, the city has chosen MLK and Montgomery corridor as a location for additional density, additional height, and larger scale apartment projects in an attempt partially to try to create additional housing and to rejuvenate the area in question. Why? Well, one, has been outside of the historic districts and the various landmark districts, so it has a little bit more lenient on what's required. Two, the area has been in need of redevelopment. That area at MLK and Montgomery is in need of redevelopment. The area on our side is in need of redevelopment. You can see here that, and we'll show a little better picture later, there's industrial uses over here. There's industrial zoning. There's a mix of a lot of vacant and derelict uses, buildings that have been vacant for decades. And on Montgomery and MLK, the project spanned all the way from Liberty, going all the way back to 35th Street now, which is well beyond where we are, in addition to a new project on Montgomery and 35th, which is a new approved for 4 stories there with 90 units on a project. If you go down, and I'm going to show you both Montgomery corridor as well as East Broad Street, you've got projects as the Bowery, you've got Skylark, you've got the Addy, you've got the Low, and all of these projects, some of these pictures I included the residents next door just so you can see many of them large 4-story buildings built immediately next to single-story and 2-story residential buildings and single and 2-story commercial buildings. And so on this opposite mirrored side of the city, we have the exact kind of development that we believe is appropriate for the corridor along East Broad and specifically in our particular location. This is, again, just more examples. This is looking down Montgomery towards across Abercorn there with 2 new projects, both 4 stories, both on both sides of the street. This is Park and Broad, which is a couple of blocks south of us on East Broad Street now, which is a 3-story new development, 0 lot line development of apartment buildings. And then this is the project up Liberty and East Broad, which is a few blocks in front of us going north, which is a 5-story new apartment complex on the corner of East Broad and Liberty, which is a little farther away along than this is in this picture now. That's another view of it looking back from across the street from the corner of the historic district. And so because of this and because of the similar nature of this particular piece of property, we originally proposed doing a DX zoning. I'm not going to show the zoning map for that area over on the west side, but there's a significant amounts of DX zoning, which was added through NUZO to that area, partially to create redevelopment, remove height restrictions, other things like that, to allow larger scale development in those areas on the west. So we originally proposed DX when we made our application back in February or March, I believe it was. We've been working our way through this project. Staff's comment to us through working with them was that their concern about DX was that it didn't have design guidelines, which it doesn't. And so there is no height restriction. There's no lot footprint. There's no any of these other restrictions. And so we were specifically asked to come back and redo our application as a PUD, which is what we did. So we amended our application and came back and applied for an SPD with the request that we also create our own set of design guidelines and establish a complete ordinance essentially for this piece of property. That's what we were asked to do. And that's what we did. A lot of what you may have heard here today was the idea that this isn't appropriate for a PUD, or it's unclear why we have design guidelines, or it's unclear why we have review processes. We were asked to include all those things in the PUD that we submitted. And then we were given an example of a PUD because we asked for an example from staff. We were given an example and we used that example exactly basically to draft the design guidelines in the PUD that we submitted. So that's what we based it off of. A lot of the things you're going to see in there about amendment processes going to MPC staff if it's less than 10% and not a major change, changes that are over 10%, major changes, height, density, things going to the MPC, staff being able to remove items unilaterally and say this has to go to MPC, which is their right, all came directly out of the previous PUDs that have been done in the city of Savannah and the example that was given us of a PUD document. We didn't make those provisions up or create them out of nowhere. We used the example that we were provided, and it's consistent with other PUDs that exist in the city. We acknowledge the fact that the guidelines are not identical to what's in TC2. If we felt like we could do our project identical to TC2, I wouldn't be here today. We wouldn't be rezoning. We wouldn't be going through this process. The goal of the PUD was to find a middle ground between TC2 and DX. No design standards that were designed for a historic district, which we are not in, and to find some middle ground between those two. That's what we saw as our task, and that's the process that we went through in filing our PUD application. For our particular piece of property, this is the property made up of these properties here. There's a small piece back here, which has been discussed previously, which the city owns, which we've been exchanging contracts with the city to acquire, but that's going to depend on what happens as we go through this process. This is a good look of an aerial. This church, as mentioned, is not here anymore, but this kind of shows you some of the uses that are around immediately across us. The reason we think this site is great is because we don't have a lot of immediate neighbors. This is not planted in the middle of a bunch of residences that are immediately adjacent to us. Directly across the street from us, we have an empty lot. This is looking across Broad Street. We have an empty lot across the street, Broad. And then to the right of that, we have two new residences that were constructed that face north-south. So we're looking at the side of these houses over here. This is diagonally across the street, which is the old Starfish Cafe. It's been vacant for a very long time. It's a commercial building. We also have a letter of support. That letter was included in the middle of letters of opposition that was in the staff report, but it's actually a letter of support from the owner of that piece of property. This is what's across the street, which is the old theater. Uniquely, this is Gwinnett here, which drops down some 20 feet as you roll by. So you can't actually access our property from Gwinnett over there. It drops down on the underpass of the railroad track. This property has recently gone through a variance request process, and a variance was approved for this property for residential apartment buildings 4 stories in height. That project had staff recommendation for approval, and it received an approval from the Zoning Board of Appeals, I believe, either last week or the week before. So that is going to become, the theater will remain the same because it is a contributing structure that cannot be changed, and otherwise they're going to be 4-story residential apartment buildings built across the street from us there. This is showing you the gap of the road there. Behind us, we have a railroad track. All that property behind us immediately is owned by CSX. It's fairly heavily wooded on both sides. There's some residences behind it. A lot of these lots are vacant, and then there's a couple of new construction houses. Diagonally going back across Bolton, we have industrial property that I believe is vacant, but is currently zoned industrial. And then adjacent to us, running along the entire width of our length of our property on Bolton, is a Georgia power plant. There are no residences on Bolton Street. The beauty of that is there's virtually no one parking on Bolton Street. If you've driven down this to look at this site, and every time I've gone over there to put signs up or take pictures, there's virtually no cars on either side of the street because there are no residences on the other side. I think all of that gives some context as to where this property is really located and what's there. Here's another picture looking back over the power plant. You can see the Park and Broad apartment complex, which is right here off in the distance. Currently on the site, there are 4 duplexes. It was mentioned by staff, a total of 8 units. It was mentioned in the report these are affordable housing units. They are not affordable housing units. They are just rental units owned by the owner. But there's 8 of them on the site currently. So we do acknowledge that though there are residences on the site, we believe that given the location and size of the site and the neighborhood around it, that having a denser 185 units is what we're proposing is a better use for the site than having only 8 units. I do want to point out these are not contributing structures. As mentioned by staff, they can be removed from the site. When you're picking a site for multifamily, you're trying to find sites that are on that have good transportation. You're trying to find sites that are located next to public transportation, next to grocery stores, next to schools, right? We mentioned in the staff report, walkability. It's great that this is walkable. There, you can walk to a middle school, an elementary school, multiple churches, and a grocery store. There are also 3 CAT bus stops within like a block or so of this. It's on 2 separate CAT bus lines. So it lends itself to be a great location for multifamily project. This trend, as I mentioned, has already started on this corridor. You've got Park and Broad, you've got Liberty and Broad being developed. You've got immediately next door to us 2 new 4-story residential buildings being constructed. And then now ours would be the 4th piece being developed along this corridor. As we've gone through this process with staff, we made several changes to our plan. We've lowered the height. We have reduced the building south of the lane to 4 stories. We have also put a 55-foot fifth-story setback on the additional site to the north of the lane. This way it will present, which is why I think those pictures were important. This way it will present as a 4-story building when you're going down the road, as opposed to a 5-story building. About 50% of the project is actually 5 stories and the other 50% are 4 stories. But this is the corner angle of Bolton and Broad, and you will see that it presents as a 4-story building because of the setbacks and because of the height. We also, since our last meeting, we reduced the total density down to 185 units from, I believe it was 205 units. We addressed fire lanes and other things like that, as was mentioned by staff. Looking at the staff report and looking at specifically the zoning criteria, the first one is whether or not the range of permitted uses is more suitable than the range of uses that are currently allowed. And there's been a lot of discussion about the uses and that we need to just stick to the TC use schedule. I want to make the point to y'all that our schedule is virtually identical to the schedule of the TC. The only thing that's added in here that wasn't in here was, I think there's a food hall reference in here. So my client's working on a food hall project with the city. Outside of that, every single one of these uses is identical to what's already allowed. What we did was actually remove uses that we thought weren't particularly appropriate. We removed pawn shops and funeral homes and laundromats and psychic offices and vehicle service shops. And one thing that came up in our last meeting was cannabis sales. That's a permitted use, a limited use in TC, but we removed it from the list. So our list is actually has less uses than the TC district, not more uses than the TC district. So I just want to make sure we were clear that we actually reduced the number of uses. And then one of the important ones for us is whether this addresses a specific need in the county or the city. The city has a housing shortage, as you know. Just over 10,000 unit housing shortage. It's not just affordable housing shortage, it's all housing shortage. And one of the things that happened in NUZO is these TC districts, which were created with specific historic design guidelines from the Mid-City District, and they were sprinkled out into the city outside of that district. They have 10,000 square foot footprint maximums, and they have 3-story height limitations. Those two items particularly are constraints on flexibility and constraints on construction that do nothing but drive up cost of construction. Yes, we could build 10,000 square foot buildings, perhaps separated out, and all it's doing is driving up rents, driving up cost and expense. And if we limit ourselves, even outside of historic districts, which this is outside of all historic districts, if we limit ourselves to those historic design guidelines, it is going to be very difficult to address the need that we have in the city for density. And so that's another reason. I've been involved in a ton of projects, and virtually every project of any scale and for any multifamily use has involved the mid-city districts outside of the mid-city has involved either a rezoning request or a variance request, virtually every one of them. And we've gotten most of them approved, to be honest with you. It's like the 4-story across the street from us on Gwinnett got approved. We got 4 stories approved all over the place on Montgomery and MLK. And the reason is for these very reasons, that there are places in the city based on what's around it and based on the fact they're not actually in the historic districts that would lend themselves to bending those historic rules that don't actually apply to these properties in order to solve a policy need, which is housing in the city. And that's really what we're here about. We're here about trying in a responsible way in a location where it's appropriate to address a policy need for the city by allowing larger scale buildings and larger height. At the end of the day, for instance, across the street, you've got 125 to 136 units and 4 stories in height. It's a little bit smaller project than ours is, smaller property. We're asking for, they've got 47 feet. We're asking for 60 feet at the tallest part of half of our project and 185 units. So we're talking about a difference of 50 units and 13 feet in height. And there are people who object to this. I understand it. And there are people that want us to stick within the structure as it currently exists. But in order to allow us to try to make a project that makes sense and to be able to create additional units, we believe that in this location, it wouldn't be appropriate everywhere, that 13 feet and those additional 50 units would be appropriate, just the same as it is appropriate on the other side as you run down the corridor. I want to make one other comment about the design guidelines too. There was a discussion about parking. We're showing parking. Yes, we intend to have structured automated parking. We're showing 205 parking spaces. I want to be clear about there's a lot of discussion about our parking request in the staff report. This is our property in red right here. This is the reduced parking area. We're immediately adjacent to it. It's on the other side of the street. Everything in the yellow gets a 60% reduction on all retail parking requirements. And it gets a 40% reduction on all restaurant parking requirements. Okay? That's automatic. Applies to them, but not to us. This is the district that's across the street. I color this yellow just so you can see. This is our site. Across the street is the Victorian district. They get 3,000 square feet. The first 3,000 square feet of commercial has no parking requirement. Okay? Because we're wedged in between these two parking areas, reduced areas, and touch both of them, we believed it was appropriate for us to have a similar reduction. But what we ultimately asked for is 2,500 feet, which is less than what Victorian gets, significantly less than what the reduced parking area gets. Our residential requirement is 1-to-1, which is the same in both areas, the same all over the city. We have not asked for a parking variance for residential. All we have asked for is 2,500 feet reduction of the first 2,500 feet of commercial reduced, which is less than both of the districts that are immediately adjacent to us. Again, trying to find a compromise between no standards and the TC standards that are put on top of us. And then lastly, I do want to mention the V&A letter. Again, there were some letters that weren't attached online. I don't know whether y'all got a copy of this or not. I just not privy to what gets sent to y'all, but this was not posted on the website with the other letters. And it wasn't shown to you today when we were discussing it. So I want to show you this just to show that the Victorian Neighborhood Association, which is directly across the street from us on the other side of Broad, my client's met with a lot of the neighborhood associations. He has sent them copies of everything we've been submitting. We've been in contact with folks over a period of what is now 11 months, 12 months. And we're proud of the fact that the Victorian Neighborhood Association supports our project. They specifically state in their letter that they support the height. They specifically state that they supported the parking. My understanding is there were additional emails in the aftermath making sure they were okay with the parking, and they confirmed, yes, we're okay. We're okay with the parking. We don't think parking is a problem here. They made one mention at the bottom, which I think was the source of the affordable housing discussion, but it says in here, the final project, they want the final project to reserve a portion for workforce housing. They don't actually ask it to be affordable. They ask it to be workforce housing, which my understanding is a term of art, but it's always describes something between 80 and 120% of AMI. My client's committed to submit some portion. We haven't committed anything in specifics. I've never stood up here and said that this was going to be an affordable housing project or an affordable housing component. We've always said we're willing to have those discussions with the city as we move forward. And that's what we're asking you to do. As was mentioned by Edward, this is a two-step process under the ordinance for PUD development. You have a general development plan and a zoning. And then from there, you move to specific, which is very expensive with full engineering plans and traffic studies. And we have to work with all the city departments on water and sewer and traffic and access and all these other things. But we can't get to that, and we can't get to spending that money. We can't get to working with the city to see if we can make a valid project here until we get past this step, which we've been trying to do for 11 months. So with that, we do believe that our application is complete. We do believe, for the reasons we stated, that this is a proper location for additional height and density. We're asking for less parking reduction than our surrounding properties are by right. And we're asking for less uses than what's currently permitted. And so we really were trying to find a middle ground between those two places, which is what we were asked to do. And we believe we've accomplished that. And would like to hopefully move forward to the city so that we can work with them to see if we can make it a viable project. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. I appreciate your patience with me. I know I'm talking slowly today.
Are there any questions for the petitioner or staff?
I have a question.
All right.
Mr. McCorkle,
Yes.
One of the statements you made was that the projects that are on the MLK corridor are outside of historic districts. Isn't it my understanding that most of that area is the streetcar district and not outside?
The streetcar was expanded to encompass them when NUZO was done. Originally, they were not inside the streetcar.
But regardless of when it was done, they reside within the historic district presently, correct?
Yes, they do.
Okay, and also those areas were more or less granted an extra story based on maintaining their base zoning district. I believe they're still TC1, TC2 with a extra floor added because they're in that corridor that was a part of that study designation. So there's a 1-story difference. So there's a 4-story max going on basically through that corridor that was studied. Everything that you've talked to us about has been 4 stories other than the one project up at the corner of, I believe, Liberty. And so how are you arguing the 5-story situation when you only have one example that even purports it that's in to me, a totally different setting than what we're talking about? And also an abandonment of the TC1, TC2. I don't think that a comparison of DX to TC1 and TC2 is appropriate at all. DX was expansion. There's no expansion on a single lot like that. So I'm trying to get the logic is to try and say that you were giving something back by going between DX to TX between DX and TC2 to create this smaller specialized zoning area. It doesn't sort of add up in my opinion that you have to abandon so much to get to this point, with other examples on the other side of town, which you've referenced, that I think do a better job of starting to try and achieve some of the things you're talking about.
I don't have the total zoning map on both sides available, but the DX is mixed in both north of us and east of us here, not that far from our location, and on the west side, both all around. And it's on multiple pieces of property, not just individual pieces of property, although some individual pieces of property have been rezoned specifically to allow greater use of those particular sites. Yes, some of the properties on the MLK Montgomery corridor got an additional floor because of the overlay, but some did not. NUZO did not adopt the additional floor in all of the areas going down, include the areas that are adjacent to mid-city. So those have been done by variance, not just an automatic story, let's say. I acknowledge that all of those buildings are 4-story in height as you run down that corridor. I don't deny that they are. We believe that the difference between the 13 feet and the ability of us to have a 5th story, that though our example may be a few blocks up the street on East Broad, I don't believe it's a completely separate area, but it's a few blocks up the street on East Broad. It is in the downtown historic district. There's no doubt about it. But we don't believe the additional units that can be obtained and the flexibility it gives us in the project and the pricing abilities it gives us in the project, we believe that 13 feet is not a big enough difference to make a 5th story make the project unreasonable. And part of that's just a consideration of whether you think height is bad for the sake of height. And I know there are a lot of folks that do believe that height is bad. I'm not implying that you do in any way. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying we believe that in certain corridors, whether it's 4 stories or 5 stories or 6 stories or whatever it is, that there are appropriate locations for height, particularly where projects don't have a lot of neighbors that are direct neighbors adjacent to them, and where they're in areas that need redevelopment and are along corridors that have similarly situated properties. Yes, it may be 47 feet instead of 60 feet, but it's similar enough that we thought it was appropriate.
Well, I think that the lots that the properties you're talking about that didn't get an automatic height variance were ones that there was a trade-off, that they did something that allowed the height to be changed. So it wasn't simply a variance. It was also some sort of, hey, we'll give you an extra floor if you do X or you do Y, I think was a part of some of what happened on the other side of town. And to speak to the height issue being bad, I'll tell you as a practitioner, I have no problem with height. But at the same time, height has appropriateness in certain areas and does affect certain regions differently. And the distance between those two sites is significant, and that's a matter of opinion as to whether height's bad or not. I don't think it's bad, but we're looking specifically at your project and the arguments been made for the appropriate use of another floor. So that's what I'm arguing right now.
I understand. And our particular property, unlike some of those on Montgomery too, our property is not in a historic district. It may be that they expand in mid-city into those, but we're certainly not in mid-city, although we have a mid-city zoning district. We're not in mid-city or any other historic district.
Other questions?
One more. Your client purchased this property and it was TC2 when it was purchased?
We have not purchased this property. My client is under contract to purchase this property, but I'm authorized by the owner to get it rezoned for the purposes of the sale.
Okay, so that's really what I'm trying to understand, that it was understood before it was ever adopted that was TC2. Okay.
Mr. Melder?
Madam Chair, thank you. I think my comments, my questions are pretty much aligned with Mr. Coleman's, especially considering the Zoning Board of Appeals decision recently to grant an extra floor to the development project that's happening just north of this project. Why the calculus for you made the argument that it's 13 feet and 52 units and there isn't much difference there. So I guess my question is back to you and the petitioner is the same question, but just reversed. It's 13 feet and 52 units. What's the big difference there between the ability to have an SPD and to move forward with TC2 and go through the same process that a project across the street was able to get a variance for a fourth floor?
I think part of the issue, part of the difference there is that they have a historic structure on their property that they can't move. And so it bifurcates their property in a way to where they can only develop around it. And I think because of that, the restriction of a 10,000 foot building footprint restriction, our maximum, is not as restrictive on them on their side as it is on ours, which would take up the entire block. So I think it's easier for them to have smaller buildings. It's been our experience, and I would tell any client this, that getting a variance from the 10,000 square foot building footprint requirement is not possible. I've tried. We've worked on that over the years, and it has not been successful in getting that done. Also, getting a fifth story as opposed to a fourth story from a variance perspective, just the way that process works, has not been successful. And so when we've had projects that have been, we're trying to find a way to not be constrained by restrictions that may not be appropriate in the location we are. We've gone about it by either doing a rezoning or doing it through a PUD or another use where we can control what people are going to see, right? Like I can show you by doing this rather than me just then going and building, our client going and building whatever he wants to build. He's bound by what we say we're going to build, which is a positive thing. But in exchange for that, we're kind of getting additional heights, larger building footprints, but there's no real good mechanism for doing that if you do it through the multiple variance process. At least that's been my experience.
Madam Chair, I have a question for staff, if that's okay. In the staff recommendation, understanding the recommendation, but looking at and reading in between the lines, understanding that the Zoning Board of Appeals recently has granted variance for a project across the street, which you mentioned in your presentation. For your recommendation for a TC2, do you find that both the 10,000 square feet requirement for the buildings within the lot and the height are of equal importance to maintaining the character of the TC2? Is there one that's more important to you, or do they both stand equally together? Or if, for instance, if this board was able to say, yes, we do think that there's some value in having a fourth floor to this project, from a professional planning perspective, what does that 10,000 square foot limitation mean to this project and to your recommendation?
So in conversation with historic staff, much of our discussion centered on the fact that 10,000 square feet was kind of a maximum for most historic structures. You don't find a lot of structures that have a footprint beyond that. And so I'd say if I had to order them, the footprint is more significant than the height. I'll leave that there.
If I understand they're asking for 5 stories, I'm just saying if they didn't ask for 5 and they asked for 4, you're right, because the project, there's been a precedent now set by a associate, body to this one that a 4th story would be appropriate in the area. I'm just trying to understand that context. And then on the Montgomery and MLK corridors, I understand those are 4-story buildings. They're within a TC1 or TC2, broadly judging by the conversations today. Are you aware, are they fit within a 10,000 square foot maximum there, or are there variances that were approved there?
I'm not quite sure how those came to be larger, but I do believe they are larger than 10,000 square feet.
One of the things that happened was when they came into the historic district. So some of them are just a little bit bigger, but not much. And basically where it's located and some of the stuff that's around it. But the Montgomery Street and that streetcar area is very different than Broad Street and Gwinnett Street, which is where this is located.
Was it that? Well, it is now.
Yeah.
Because of the development there on Montgomery and Martin Luther King.
It was an
and I guess
economic development corridor.
What's that?
The
Economic development corridor, and that was one of the reasons they got some of the additional
space.
Leeway.
Yeah, they got additional height because at one point in time that was considered as no man's land. And I actually went and talked to city council about putting it in a district because it didn't have any coverage.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when they got, probably about 6 or 7 years ago, that's when they kind of got some coverage. So for a long period of time, they were just out there. As Mr. McCorkle referenced, this property is not in a historic district. The DX, as referenced, is usually only allowed in the historic districts, which is why staff, when speaking with them, encouraged them if they wanted to go down this path to look at doing something else, because it wouldn't have been consistent with the comp plan. It was just a bunch of other things that went along with us making our recommendation. But we also talked to them about putting a smaller building on the side as well.
Maybe I can ask my question a different way. I understand that the MPC staff is recommending denial on this, but if there are commissioners who, and I'll just state where I'm at as a commissioner, I feel like the petitioner is pushing the envelope for what's appropriate there with the SPD. I feel that way, but I also feel like there may be some room to create density similar to the project just north of it on Gwinnett Street. And so I'm asking of the two options that we have as commissioners on the table. One is to approve the petitioner's request, what I personally feel is pushing the envelope, and to deny it, which kind of leaves it at first home plate, first base. Is there an option between that the commissioner should be thinking about to be appropriate?
I would be remiss if I did not point out the fact that Jerome Elder set a new standard for community involvement in going to what really became a community design process. He had more community meetings than I have seen with any other prior petitioner. The current applicant, to my knowledge, had one meeting that staff was invited to. I will, concede that obviously other discussions were had because we received other letters, but actual open meetings where things were openly discussed, and I'd say there were revisions made to that project based on individual people. It literally reflects anybody who kind of has a hand on that site. Their perspective was taken into account. And I'd say first and foremost, that is kind of the line that I would draw. If the petitioner is open to making this an actual design process that takes the community's feedback into consideration, I think that would kind of set this on a different trajectory.
In addition to that, Mr. Elder, I would be remiss if I did not mention that when Mr. Elder's project came in, it came in at 5 stories. We talked to them about lowering, getting rid of some of the height and working with the community, which they moved forward. And the second thing, which is really important, is that while this application has been ongoing for, I think, about 11 months, as Mr. McCorkle mentioned, we have spent a tremendous amount of time going back and forth trying to get this project into an approvable format. But we never got some of the things that we felt were needed in order to have it be something that we could sign off on. Does it mean that we can't get there? That's going to be up to the applicant with regards to whether he wants to try to continue it to have more discussion, but they have to be able to make some concessions about what is needed to get to the point where it is something that you all can approve.
I understand. And I'm guessing that the community engagement is certainly admirable and essential, but I'm assuming, drawing conclusions that the person you're talking about is the petitioner north on Gwinnett.
He is the
On the north
architect
side.
for the petitioner.
On the north side of this parcel.
That's correct.
Okay.
Story all the way, is it? It's only partial fourth story.
That's correct. It's 3-story and 4-story. And again, it was because, of course, they're developing along the back to preserve the theater.
So is the barometer here then community engagement?
No, there's just an inappropriateness about this proposed development, and it definitely sort of has that dissatisfying, do we wait or, do we actually allow something to happen in a place where, admittedly there is a need. But in all honesty, not all development is good development. I don't necessarily think it's just community involvement, but I think that was the icing on that cake.
Okay.
Can I respond to the community development involvement thing? My client, and some of which I was involved with, has had 10 or so meetings with various neighborhood associations, keeping in mind we're not in any of those actual neighborhood associations. My understanding is that, the project across the street, I wasn't involved with it. There was still objection to the project across the street. There were multiple letters of objection to it. And the project got approved. But I know Mr. Elder, he's a good architect, but we involve the community. We have a letter of support from the Victoria Neighborhood Association directly across the street, which we worked very hard to get.
Well, we have
And
other
so I
comments
don't think
appear.
it's with noting that we have not involved the community or somehow are an example of bad community engagement in what we've been doing. We did respond to specific requests of the community as we've gone through this process. Again, we lowered one of the buildings on one side of the lane down to 4 stories. We pushed the 5th story back 55 feet off of Broad Street. So again, when you're on Broad Street, you can't see the 5th story. So we did some of those things working with the community discussions that we were having, which partially is what led to us having the support of the V&A. It presents as a 4-story building. The building across the street does step back 3 to 4 stories, but they also have a historic 2-story building. There's a contributing structure that they're building around. And so, yeah, they stepped it back 3 to 4 stories, and that makes sense in that location. Every piece of property is different. And we tried to design this in such a way so that it would not present as big of a building as it may be.
If I may, the other thing to keep in mind is that the property across the street that you're referencing, the zoning on that is TC2. So the reason that they did not come before this board is they asked for a variance in height.
Mm-hmm.
Other than that, they are developing within the current standards of TC2.
And they are restoring the theater, aren't they?
They are restoring the theater. In this case, just keep in mind, this property is currently zoned TC2. So
Thank you. We've got
so
some more
that you know,
comments.
it's currently zoned TC2.
Ms. Amick?
So I'm understanding that the MPC was not involved in that project across the street. It is.
The board of the project across the street that everybody's been talking about, Mr. Elder's project, basically they came in to get a variance for height, not to deal with having anything extra or above board than what is allowed in the TC2 zoning district.
Okay.
In this case, the applicant, when they initially came in, they wanted to use the DX standard. It's because there's really not any standards, and that standard is usually used in the landmark district or in the historic districts because it has to go to the historic review board. So that's one of the biggest difference to look at the design. In this case, it's not in the historic district, so there would be no design review per se. And whatever was approved is approved. So just for clarification, just want you to know about how that DX works and why that is used in the historic districts in some cases and not outside of the historic district. But please know, Mr. Elder, they designed that project based on the current requirements of TC2. And they went in and again, they wanted 5 stories. We said, no, look at lowering it and go talk to the community. And that's what they did. I know that the applicant has had multiple meetings. So, Mr. Morrow might not have been a party to some of those meetings, but I do know, and I will give them credit that they did have some meetings. But I do think that there was a lot of stuff discussed at those meetings that nobody can agree to, just as the Victorian neighborhood letter talked about affordability. Well, we don't have any control over that. So, we don't know because we haven't gone to every meeting what was discussed. The issue is the zoning and what is submitted appropriate or not at this location?
Okay, so my concern is the project across the street. I understand it was a variance in height, and it's gone from 3 to 4. And now we are working with this project, which is asking to go basically from 4 to 5, or from 3 to 4 to 5, correct?
Yes, but it's more than that. If the applicant were developing under the TC2 standards, which it's currently got the zoning for, and they wanted to do a height variance, and they could take the same path that Mr. Elder took and go to the Board of Zoning Appeals and ask for a height variance. But they are asking for additional stuff that you get when you do a plan development. You basically have a little bit more detail submitted when you're submitting stuff because you're basically creating your own little district. And that's one of the biggest difference. So it's not as simple as them asking 3, 4, 5. It's them asking for other things in addition to the height that they are not wanting to do based on the TC2 zoning.
So, Mr. McCorkle, is this project, without getting that change in rezoning, if you did just the request for a variance in height, if you don't get that, is this project not feasible?
We don't believe that it's feasible. And ultimately, we think that the things like the 10,000 square foot building footprint, which we're also trying to get out of, again, we're not building around a historic structure on our property. But all it does ultimately is make the building cost more money. Mm-hmm. I mean, we could, in theory, build something that looked exactly the same as what we're proposing, except we could put firewalls in and divide that building into 10,000 square foot sections. It would just drive up the cost, require additional elevators, require additional firewall. It just drives up costs. It drives up rents. That's what it does ultimately. And it takes away flexibility of the person that's building the building. And we just don't believe it's necessary in a place where we're not in the district it was designed to be consistent with. And so that was the nature of the request. So because we are, as I see it, there are 3 variances being asked for in our project ultimately, right? One is the height. One is the 10,000 square foot footprint maximum going away. And the other one is we wanted to have the first 2,500 feet of commercial not have to be parked, to be actually less than what they get across the street. But those are really, in my mind, the 3 variances.
Okay, thank you. Travis.
So 2 things. I want to echo what Mr. Melder said about pushing the envelope, because we see this where, especially on these corridors where we have a 3-story building, and then the next developer says, well, we're just 1 more story. And then the next developer says, well, we're just 1 more story. Next thing you know, you have an 8-story building next to these 2-story historic properties. So I want to echo that I don't think 5 stories is necessary to make the project feasible. And I think we too often ask developers, will this make it feasible for you? And that's not what we're here for. It's whether or not it's appropriate. So whether 3 stories is financially good or 4 stories or 5 stories, that's irrelevant to what we're here to decide. The second thing that I wanted to ask of staff, that development at Liberty and East Broad is TC2S. What is the difference between TC2S and TC2? And that is a fairly large development that's not yet complete, but very close to it.
So the S designation at the end of any zoning that you see in the city is site plan specific. That is a reference to the prior zoning ordinance. It is similar to this, except all of those would correspond to meeting the requirements of the established zoning district. And the difference with the PUD is you, in essence, kind of get to pick your own flavor, if you will.
So which is more appropriate for this area, since everything else seems to be TC2 or a variant of it?
The TC2 zoning district is appropriate in staff's opinion. A TC2S, in essence, would mean we are asking for approval of a general development plan. We would really be at the same place, except it's just approval of a site plan meeting all the requirements of the TC2 rather than, hey, here are my standards. Do I meet them?
in addition to that, when that project came in, the applicant also got their design approved, because it was just outside, I'm trying to remember, of the district. So therefore, there was really a lot of concern about what that building would look like, and as well as some other things. And to be candid with you, we would have been happier if that building was pulled back a little bit. I mean, it's a massive building, and I think that what you're seeing now kind of addresses some of the concerns we had with just the massing of that site. However, they did come in. We spent time with the architect looking at the design, everything, and they basically zoned that whole thing. So you got an opportunity to see what was going to be placed there. The community got a chance to see it, and that's what they are building.
It's essentially the same thing. At the end of the day, it's a site plan specific zoning that's tied to TC. What we're asking for is a site plan specific zoning that's tied to TC. It has the same uses, as if we have less uses. The difference is, and the height's the same as it is there. Their buildings aren't 10,000 square feet either, but it's essentially the same thing. It's looking at a piece of property that's just outside the edge of the district and looking at it and deciding whether or not it's a good place for density. And if you're going to do height and you're going to do density, we want to make sure we know what's going to be built there. And so we want it to be tied to a site plan, which is why we went down the road we did. We even included design guidelines as far as, I forgot what all the terms are, and Leo would know all of them, but all of the way that we divided up, we took from some of the historic guidelines just to show that we want to make sure that the building looks right, but we're tied to whatever it is we get approved through the specific development plan is what we have to build. That's the nature of the PUD itself. If we want to change it, we have to come back and ask.
Mr. Stevens.
Two really quick questions. Probably going to be more for staff. Future land use map. What is it showing for this area? And then the second question was based on some information that was provided in the petitioner's presentation of us this body asking for them to come back as a PD. Do we have minutes or information that's saying that this body asked for them to come back with a PD, a PUD?
So to answer your first question, the subject parcels, there are 9 of them. It is a combination of traditional commercial and single family. So again, there is that strict consistency requirement. Once those are combined, it will contain something that reflects an anticipation of intensified uses, mixed uses, so it is consistent. To answer your second question, so this application came in as a DX. It's my understanding all of those conversations were had amongst staff. It would not have been.
I actually for clarification, because I was part of those conversations, so I feel better at answering that question. When the applicant came in and we spoke with them, we told them that the request that they had was not consistent with what is currently in the comp plan, just because DX, it's not in a historic district, and it's a district that is not, you don't see it outside of the historic district. It is usually in the historic district. You generally get design reviewed. Those were big issues. The other issue with it was massing and density. So my suggestion to them was, and we gave them a copy just as a guide of some of the stuff that should be included, but was very clear with them that they needed to have more detail because they were coming in, creating their own little, it's like creating your own little zoning ordinance in a sense, with a set of design guidelines with regards to how it will be developed. But we spoke with them about that. We talked to them about reducing the height. Height was always a real big concern of ours, as well as dealing with the parking based on some of the discussions that took place about how they were going to park and where they were going to park. There was some road issues with regards to the city still having ownership of a road that was included in the application. There were just a whole bunch of stuff that was part of what we saw that caused us some pause. But what we try to do when people come in with an application is we look at it, we try to get them to something that we can at least have a serious discussion about whether it's something that we could support or not. We have spent, and I am not kidding, we have spent months working with the applicant. We probably have of time since Edward has been here, I know at least, 14, 15 hours, if not more than that. And before he got here, we probably had another, we've have over a week full time of working to try to get this to work. But when we are looking at it from the standpoint of context, as well as what is going on in that area of Broad Street, we are not looking at it from the standpoint of, oh yeah, Liberty Street and Broad, they have a massive building. It's a different, that's a different area. But we kept getting pushback from dealing with lowering the heights, dealing with the number of units, even trying to get some more information about the number and the combo of units, because that will influence what parking is. We spent a lot of time kind of doing a hybrid SPR through the city, working with them, and they've been awesome, to work with in engineering with Michelle's group and some others to try to see, well, what's going to happen? Are they going to close the little roadway? There's just a lot of stuff, just movement, how people will get around. This is a very small site. I can't stress that enough. It's only an acre and, it's a little bit over an acre, maybe an acre and a half. Very small site with a lot of stuff to be placed on it. But we stressed that, whatever they did, they needed to think about having good design, a good set of design guidelines, covenants, all of that stuff that you expect to see. And we're here today. I think that, if you decide that, and you have that option that you want to continue it, to give the applicant an opportunity to see if, after hearing some of your comments and feedback, if they can come back up with an alternative that could be someplace in the middle with regards to making it fit a little bit more with the context of the area, then that's great. But we did get a lot of letters, as you know. We did get, some for approval. But even if you look at some of the letters we got in approval, there's always some type of reference to housing affordability, which we can't control and have no dog in the fight for that. But that is something that you all as a board can make a decision on, talking to the applicant. The applicant's attorney's here. The applicant himself is here. With regards to talking about how they are going to address the needs. But we have spent a lot of time, city staff has spent a lot of time doing review, trying to figure out what we could do to try to make this work. And that's what we try to do.
All right, cool. So a lot was said, but I just want to make sure that I'm extrapolating the proper information from a future land use map. Currently, with them being individual parcels, there are multiple uses that are identified from the future land use map, correct?
All the parcels are going to be combined.
I know, but I'm saying currently future land use map is showing several different things.
It is showing two different things. So adjoining Broad Street, it is showing traditional commercial, and interior, it is showing single family residential.
Okay, I want to make sure I got that. And from as far as whether or not this body and or staff recommend that they come back with a PD, it sounds more so that was not necessarily a direct ask, but more of a conversation to try to figure out what is the most appropriate path forward. No?
Absolutely. I'd say that's accurate.
That was, I would say that was a suggestion and a request that if they wanted to move forward, that a PD would be more appropriate. And when we were asked, well, what does that kind of look like? Well, we always give people generally the same type of stuff when someone looks at a good set of plan and design guidelines. If you look at Eastern Wharf, I'll throw that out. They've got a serious plan development. They got a set of design guidelines, restrictive covenants, the whole 9 yards. So when we share that information, it's not for them to take exactly. It's kind of saying, look, this is the kind of stuff that's included, but we also need to make that whatever you are putting, designing in there, make sure that you are taking into consideration the adjacent, the context of the area.
All right, thank you.
More comments? All right, I have a couple of questions myself. So the TC designation, that project is outside of the TC designation because of the height of the buildings, the footprint of the buildings, the parking.
Not necessarily the parking, no. The parking is a different set of standards.
The 2,500 square feet of parking.
Right.
What about density?
Yes, it is also outside of density. So there is a gross metric, I believe that I came up with 141 units that would be permitted based on an area of 1.4 acres. So in essence, that is dividing the 1.4 acres by 435 square feet per dwelling unit.
And at this point in time, the only plan that we have for parking is the one that shows the parking back to back, 2 rows of parking back to back, where it's obvious that it has to be a machine or someone going in and yeah.
That is correct. The 205 number that was stated by the petitioner's agent earlier does not appear anywhere in the October 13th metric.
Just
submission.
58 parking spaces
The only thing
is
we
all
can
we've
see.
seen. And we don't, well, there is a place that shows parking
13
in one.
off-street spaces in between the north and south building. There was no additional parking detail that was provided regarding structured parking.
And the structured parking would probably be multi-level, I'm assuming.
That might be a petitioner question, most likely.
So I'm thinking that if it's multi-level going down, we're talking basement parking. I'm going to come up and speak to it. Could the applicant speak to that? Oh.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, this is a picture from Starland. This isn't a picture from our project, but yeah, the intent is you're going to have semi-automatic structured parking where you're going to have, let's say it's either 3 or 4 cars stacked up. And so, yes, the portion where the parking deck will be constructed, some of that would be under the ground. Yes. Partially.
But we're talking more than 1 story underground.
No, one
or more
story,
than 1 level.
no more than 1 level underground.
Really?
It doesn't take an entire, it doesn't, with the automated systems, it doesn't, one of the reasons to use them, it doesn't take an entire floor of a parking deck to stack cars on top of each other.
But you're asking basically for 4 variances with this special zoning to special plan development. I mean, if it were a TC, you'd be asking for 4 variances, at least 4 variances.
I believe there's only 3, but I'm not sure I heard what the 4th one was. Density. Yeah. I mean, ultimately the density is controlled by the parking and the height.
Sorry, if I could, let me just pick this thing up. How about that? So the parking requirements are in section 9, which are not actually directly related to zoning. Parking requirements are set based on specific uses. So there's a 1-to-1 requirement for off-street parking spaces for residences, and it varies depending on non-residential uses. The use-related requests then fall under kind of the TC zoning district. The density, the height, the building footprint, all of those are associated with the TC2 district.
All right, thank you. Any other comments? All right, I do have several speakers. Given the number of speakers that we have, I'm going to give you 2 minutes apiece, if that's okay. The first speaker that I have is James Hunsrucker. If you come up and state your name, please. Could you state your name for the record, please?
Certainly. My name is James Hunsrucker. I am president of the Forsyth Park Community Alliance. I have a presentation, but I can't find it. I'm not sure. Wait, maybe there it is. Yep, that's me. How do I maximize that? Thank you. Yes. Just so you know, this is the Elder Project on the other side, on the north side. If you give me a little extra time, you can see the 4 stories, which are set back on the top. It is a 3-story project. They are historic buildings, but we were also told that they can be demolished just like on the south side. That was according to the lawyer for the applicant on the north side, Mr. Yellen. This project also has, well, let me get to my script. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. We ask that you deny this request for a small plan development from the current TC2 zoning. Traffic flows, parking requirements, and the site's footprint limit the developer's ambitions. The intent of the small plan development is not met by this application. The actual language to create the new district does not exist, nor is it proposed. So the petition to rezone to the unknown district cannot occur. Procedurally, the process is incorrect and the petition should not be heard. I will be referring to this project proposed on the north side of Gwinnett, the site of the O Theater. The developer of the north created a project at an acceptable scale, majority 3 stories that are harmonious with the surrounding neighborhood. This north project incorporates the historic buildings and has open space. At the recent ZBA, the north developer was granted additional 5 feet. That was all that they were granted in order to accomplish the 4th story. We are worried about the city will be forced to condemn the building on the south when the machine that parks the cars fails. Adequate parking will no longer be met by the complex. Condemning will be necessary to protect the surrounding blocks from the parking demands that are coming from the petitioned project. Second slide. Next. Okay. You can see that.
Excuse me, I don't think you're going to be able to finish the slide presentation in 2 minutes.
Okay. We are wary of the requested small plan development after watching for months the state of the Forum Group's Starland project. Pictures were taken on Saturday. Please see the flaws in the proposed master plan of this site, South Gwinnett project. The coverage is too high compared to the historic record, and it does not preserve Savannah's.
I'm sorry, your 2 minutes are up.
May I ask for extra time? Because they had over an hour.
Oh, there was some discussion in there as well. Is anyone willing to give up some time for Mr. Brown? Okay. You got another 2 minutes.
Thank you, ma'am. The 2004 comprehensive plan calls for expanding preservation. Here is your opportunity. The threshold in the first 2 paragraphs of the ordinance compels you to save the 5 historic structures at South Gwinnett. They are recognized as significant on the National Register. These structures represent the workman housing. Residential properties on this block were built by freed slaves during Reconstruction. Demolition of these historic properties would be more salt in the wound of Savannah's large population of African Americans who had to witness the demolition of Bethel AME Church in 2001. History is worth preserving because it is the foundation of the community. Not only do tourists gobble it up, but they also leave their money. Residents love Savannah's history too. Preservation makes us better people. In summary, we ask that you deny this application, for it does not meet the intent of this small plan development according to the ordinance. This application is only a high-density, large apartment building on a small lot that is not unique or innovative. The actual language to create the new district does not exist, nor is it proposed. So the petition to rezone to the unknown district cannot occur. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd also like to add one thing, that the apartment complex at Park in East Broad that they referenced that was past the substation, the electrical substation, that is only a 3-story structure. And also it has on-site open air parking, and it's first come, first serve. So the excess parking is on the street, which is frequently full.
Thank you. All right, I have Stephen Decanet.
Stephen Decanet, I'm one of the neighbors that actually going to be living very close to this new building that they're proposing. I don't know why this is the second time the statements were being made that there are very few neighbors. There are neighbors all across, all around this new building. I just want to state I'm very happy that Mr. Coleman stated what he stated, because to me it made no sense. Some of the things that were said about this, coming up with a new agreement into DX to TC2, and so we're going to do SPD. It made no sense to me whatsoever. I do want to say it's been 6 weeks. They were asked to come back, and I think it was you, Ms. Jarrett, who asked them to come back with a proper parking designation. They did not do that. This picture that they showed here that I happened to look at, 58 parking spots, and then they say it's one floor, but it's going to be stacked. I have no idea. How are you going to stack 205 cars on one floor with a machine? And like Jim said, when it breaks down, then what happens? They don't have a parking plan at all. They are just coming here to build a large building. It's not really about affordable housing. It's about profit. That's what this is about. We want to maximize the amount of space, this tiny lot, build as much as we can build. And I don't care what the community says. We were notified through Jim about a meeting in the community at the WW Law Center. One meeting, I don't know what, 10 meetings he's talking about in the neighborhood. One meeting, we could barely hear anything at the WW Law Center. Anyway, that is one. The parking issues hasn't been resolved. They are talking about 205 spots. There are no 205 spots. They're going to be parking on Gwinnett Street. I live on Gwinnett Street. Number two, I think that it was Mr. Coles who said in the last meeting 6 weeks ago that they should really reconsider this idea of 4 to 5 stories. They did not reconsider. They have come back with the same old thing. We want 5 stories. Why? For profit. That's why they want 5 stories. They need to follow what the elder group did. They were fantastic. We went to an elder group meeting. They responded to every single member of the community. The meeting that I went to, that forum did, was a joke, absolute joke. They just nodded their heads and they did whatever they want. We all said the same thing. 3 floors. They did whatever they wanted.
Thank you.
And
Your 2 minutes.
one more thing. The last thing I want to say is I asked last time when I was here, Broad Street suddenly becomes one way. If forum is allowed this permission, they should expand that street, give us extra 6 feet, and please make Broad Street 2-way so that the traffic doesn't come on Gwinnett Street. Thank you very much.
All right. Michael Higgins.
My name is Michael Higgins. I reside at 625 East Broad Street, which is about less than a block away from this site. This project could easily be accommodated in TC2. The project across the street, first of all, a few clarifications to be made. It presents as a 2-story building on Broad Street because Jerome Elder brought the Broad Street facing side down to 2 stories, put basically a terrace, brought it up to 3 stories, then it goes to 4 in the back. They removed their request for the 5th story. Very sympathetic to not only the theater next door, but the National Historic District across the street. I believe the petitioner stated that the North Project had 120 some units. That is not true. It has approximately 85. They would have been allowed to have about 125, but they chose to go 30% less in density. I fully support development in the neighborhood. I mean, I've had my house now for 5 or 6 years, and I plan on keeping it for the rest of my life. I support high density development, but high density development within TC2. Originally, I supported this project. I withdrew my support some time ago based on staff meetings and just logistics for the neighborhood. It's just not a practical project. So I would ask you to retain the TC2 zoning. Thank you.
Thank you. Ed Perch.
Hi, good afternoon.
Hi.
My name is Ed Perch, and I live at 539 East Gwinnett Street. So I'm basically 3 buildings away from the project site. And I would also request that you please deny this zoning change and keep the TC2 density small so that that site is more broken up. I find it interesting that Savannah Fire has forced some scaling back so that they can actually put out a fire if this thing catches fire under construction or And I think that's good, but I think it needs to go further and keep the TC2. This current design really hasn't changed since it's first been submitted. And trying to use a 20-foot city right-of-way, East Gwinnett Lane, as a main entry to a 200-unit building just makes absolutely no sense. It should be, if anywhere, be entered off of Bolton Street, and even that it's a very narrow street. You have Broad Street north of Gwinnett that's, I believe, 140-foot right-of-way. South of Gwinnett Street, it goes down to 60 or 80 feet. So it's just an accident waiting to happen, and there are accidents there about every month or so. We get a pretty major accident, and so adding another 250 cars with commercial. And also one other point is that trying to use the Victorian district limitations on parking for the petitioner, but then not using those same limitations on design just seems to be it doesn't make sense to me. So I would, again, thank you for your time, and please request that you deny this application.
Thank you. All right, and I have Steve Edwards.
Oops. Thank you, and good afternoon. My name is Steve Edwards, and I represent the Downtown Neighborhood Association. The proposed project is outside of but adjacent to our geographic area, so our only concerns are related to the collateral effects of the project. Those collateral effects are primarily related to parking and traffic. To the extent we have concerns about those issues, I believe they've already been adequately addressed by the staff and other commentators. So I will simply endorse those comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any applicants or any speakers online?
There was a person named Chantal Morton. That person is not online right now, but we do have another person named Denise Flojo. And
all right.
I'm going
Ms.
to
Flojo,
unmute.
can you hear me? Go ahead, please. State your name for the record.
They are still self-muted.
Can you unmute yourself?
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yes, I'm Denise Flojo. I'm a resident in the neighborhood, actually right down by the Masons Hall, which is at Huntington and East Broad Street. And I know one of the things that Mr. McCorkle mentioned early on was that, a lot of derelict area in the neighborhood, which is really not true. From that building at Liberty Street, we have an active school, a very active county park with a dog park, the Masons Hall, a very active church, and now what looks like will be a very active building site within the C2 zoning. And as a neighbor there, I had big concerns. I've been to the meeting that Mr. Hudsrucker had set up with the project, as well as the ones with Jerome Elder. And I see no reason living there why everything that needs to be done can't be done with the TC2. I was not one who was a proponent for the fourth story, but the way Mr. Elder did it, I think will work for our neighborhood. I think it'll make our neighborhood more vibrant there. So I just ask that you don't, in the current form, approve this project, and please ask them to go back and work within the TC2 so we have something that is preferably 3, but no more than 4 stories for many reasons, parking especially, as well as just the height. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I understand Chantel Morton's on the phone.
Yes, thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. My name is Chantel Morton, and I am a resident of Savannah. I live at the corner of East Broad and East Jones. Thank you so much for taking the time to hear me. And I am opposed to this position, or to this petition. My concerns are based on everything that has been presented this meeting and the previous meeting that they presented, but it does concern me about precedents being set, which has been addressed earlier, and also that community input is really necessary, and this has not been done. I was at the one meeting that the gentleman, one of the residents had mentioned earlier. Deficiencies, as Mr. Murrow presented earlier, should be finalized prior to allowing this request for rezoning to proceed. And 3 or maybe 4 other points, based on the presenter's review, as it was based on his client, which is not necessarily 100%, is going to be 100%, knowing that properties do sometimes get sold. And allowing a rezoning is not a guarantee of what is being requested will actually happen. And I wish I had been involved or aware of the proposal when Liberty and East Broad, when that project was being presented. However, I have learned, and I'm getting more involved now and hearing about other projects that are taking place. And one other point is that was referenced to the MLK and Montgomery density and increased height. That area is next to an interstate. The property being requested for this rezoning is high residential. Even though the presenter alluded to the lack of neighbors, there are traditional established neighborhoods with residents surrounding it. And that has also been addressed by a few other speakers. So I do believe that that should be something that is definitely taken into consideration with any project, that residents are crucial to these developments and to the input that is just for that quality of life. And finally, development projects with ambiguity or intentions have become far too common, in my opinion, and approval of applications that have ambiguity historically tend to lend to problems that are detrimental to the integrity of the city, as well as the quality of life for residents and neighbors to this site specifically as we're addressing it. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. All right. The petitioner, would you like to come back up and address the comments?
Just briefly, I'll note that you did have some letters of support. Hopefully it was in your packet, including the letter from the VNA, if you've got a copy of it. Just on the last comment that was made, we are bound by what we're proposing. Unlike a regular rezoning, by doing a PUD, we are bound to what we are saying we're going to do. If we sell the project, or my client, if this were to get approved by city council and my client were to not close the project or the transaction, that's now the zoning for the property. And so any future buyer would be bound by what it is. And if it wanted to be changed, they would have to come back through this process, back through MPC and back through city council in order to make that happen. So part of the benefit of having a PUD is you do in fact know what's going to be built, as opposed to even a variance or a rezoning where you don't necessarily know what's going to be built. I just say again, we believe we desperately need units in the city. We desperately need housing in the city. Yes, people who build housing units build them to make money. People who build grocery stores build them to make money, and people who build everything build it to make money, including single family residential houses and 2-story buildings and 3-story buildings. But we need units, and we believe that this location was good for that because, again, it is not in a historic district. It is not underneath the normal realm of these restrictions. It is subject to restrictions that were not originally meant to be applied to it. And so we looked at the location. It's next to an underpass. It's next to a railroad track. It's next to industrially zoned property. It's next to a Georgia power plant. And so looking at the location, and I acknowledge that there are neighborhoods around us, but that area right there is not particularly developed as a residential neighborhood. It certainly is surrounded by it, but there's some need for work in that area. One is the project across the street on Gwinnett, which is great. And hopefully the one across the street from that will get redesigned where the Starfish is, and hopefully it'll go up higher too and get some residences in the area which are needed. But we just believe that looking at this particular project its similarity to the other side of the corridor. We believe that it was a good opportunity to not be hamstrung from efficiencies and flexibility and all these other things that drive up cost, to allow them to have some flexibility in what they're doing by doing a PUD, a site-specific project, to add those units in a location where we think it can take it. And so with that, we would just ask y'all to, vote one way or another for recommendation for approval or denial, and we'll move on to council and see what we go. So with that, thank you.
Thank you. All right, board discussion. Nobody has any, how about a motion?
Coleman, I make a motion to approve staff recommendation.
Cole, second.
All right. Any discussion of the motion? All right, we'll move forward with vote.
Just for clarity, the recommendation is for denial. So
Yes.
This is a recommendation or a motion to deny the petition.
Thank you, Wayne.
Development.
All right, Ms. Amick?
I agree with denying it.
Yes.
Yes.
All right. Ms. Bowles?
Yes.
Mr. Coleman?
Yes.
Mr. Coles?
Yes.
Ms. Epstein?
Yes.
Irvin's not here. Mr. Kegler?
Yes.
Mr. Melder?
Yes.
Mr. Noah?
Yes.
Mr. Notrika?
Yes.
Mr. Stevens?
Yes.
Mr. Woody?
Yes.
Mr. Welch?
No.
I too say yes, the motion passes. Thank you. And now we're going to go on to regular business. Map amendment for 9965 Ferguson Avenue and 1001 Bethesda, rezoned from R2 EO to PRA.
Oh. Hold on one moment. All right, thank you for your patience. Melissa Lito, MPC staff. This is a map amendment for 1.4 acres between two parcels, and they are both zoned two-family residential with an environmental overlay. The applicant is requesting to have it rezoned to PRA, Planned Residential Agriculture Zoning District. The intent for the rezoning is to have a plant nursery use with ancillary storage for the equipment required. This map amendment request originated from a code case on the subject property for functioning as a plant nursery storage equipment. The business has been active for 2 years now. The subject properties are located on the west side of Ferguson Avenue, approximately 88 feet west of Lehigh Avenue. The 1001 Bethesda parcel to the left, which is the smaller triangle-shaped parcel, is undeveloped and has never been developed. It is too small for independent use and is more closely related to other parcels that it adjoins. The right-of-way between the two parcels, Lehigh Avenue and Bethesda Road, provides access to existing homes. The 9965 Ferguson Avenue parcel to the right currently functions as a lay-down outdoor storage yard for commercial operations. Based on observations during a site visit, the property contains box trucks, steer loaders, and piles of debris. No plants were seen and no trees are growing on the site for the nursery use. There is a black mesh screening over a fence to protect the equipment. The property owner would like to show you the site plan.
that they're proposing. The property owner would like to utilize the site for an office with associated parking for the 7 to 8 employees that are operating the business, storage for box trucks and steer loaders, and plants, trees, and turf. The property currently does not have active access to water or a sewer, so it is not able to store any plants, trees, and turf on site. The plants, trees, and turf are currently purchased and delivered to properties that the property owner serves. Most of the properties the property owner serves are located within the Skidaway Island and Islands community. However, if the requested zoning is approved, the applicant would pursue a drilled well and sewer system and or try to tie into the county's utilities so that they can have plants, trees, and turf on site. The future land use map classifies this parcels as residential single family. This designation is defined as areas identified for single family detached residential dwellings at a density not to exceed 8 units per gross acre. This category includes non-residential uses that are compatible with the residential character and scale of the neighborhood. As regard to public services and facilities, the property is served by the Chatham County Police Department and Chatham Emergency Services. Currently, again, there is no available water and sewer available on site. However, if they are to be approved, the applicant intends to install a drilled well and sewer system. Regarding Chatham area transit availability, public transit is available approximately 278 feet from the subject parcel. 9965 Ferguson Avenue along Ferguson Avenue. There is one bus stop on Ferguson Avenue. Going over the policy analysis. The petitioner is requesting to rezone the subject property to the PRA classification zoning. The P prefix at the beginning of the RA zoning designation means the request is for a planned district. The following stipulation within the Chatham County zoning ordinance applies to a planned district submittal, as seen below, review by Chatham County Commission, where the MPC finds that there are unusual or extraordinary conditions associated with an application for rezoning and that planned district classification is warranted, the MPC shall require that the application prepare a general development plan. After review of the general development plan, the MPC shall submit the plan with its recommendation to the County Commission for consideration as part of the rezoning process. The County Commission may approve the plan as presented, amend the plan as part of the adopted rezoning, reject the plan and the rezoning petition, or return the plan to the MPC for further consideration and hold the rezoning application in abeyance. The general development plan approved by the County Commission shall constitute the approved use for the site. Any subsequent desired change in land use for the property that is not consistent with the approved general development plan shall be resubmitted in the same manner as the original general development plan and shall require review and a recommendation by the MPC and review and approval by the County Commission. If approved, the request to rezone the property to planned residential agriculture would only permit the requested plant nursery use and only in the specific configuration established on the approved site plan. Any other configuration of the requested use, as, for example, addition of a building, allowance of plant sales on site, would require recommendation from the MPC and approval of the Chatham County Commission. Additionally, use of the property in a manner inconsistent with the approved conditions could result in code enforcement action against the business owner. The subject property is adjacent to residential properties, the Bethesda Home for Boys, the Kroger grocery store, and a trailer park. The requested rezoning from R2 environmental overlay to PRA is conditioned so as to not impact the residential uses surrounding the subject parcel. In addition, as the requested zoning is a planned district, it has stricter conditions that require buffer requirements, limitations of no retail sales on site, hours of operation, specific types of equipment that shall be stored indoors and outdoors, as well as a preservation plan for the existing trees that will require approval of by the county's tree arborist. Staff finds that the proposed zoning is appropriate for this location. MPCs recommends approval of the request to rezone the identified property 9965 Ferguson Avenue from R2EO to PRA. The planned RA plant nursery in this specific instance is recommended by staff to have the following conditions. 1, there shall be no retail sales on site, employee use only. 2, the hours of operation shall be 6:30 a.m. until 6:30 p.m. 3, the use of identified storage areas shall be only for vehicles, skid steer loaders, and landscaping materials. 4, the indoor storage shall only be used for other equipment. 5, there shall be a review and approval of a tree survey and preservation plan by the county arborist. 6, there shall be no storage of waste that would attract vermin. 7, a 25-foot undisturbed vegetative buffer shall surround the subject site. And there is an additional condition of no mulch or compost on the site. In consideration of the property at 1001 Bethesda, MPC staff recommends denial of the request to rezone the property from R2EO to PRA. The existing zoning of that parcel shall remain the same and shall not be used in association with the requested plant nursery, as it is too small to produce that site, as well as it is in the middle of a right-of-way area, which does have access from the residential properties in the back. I am here as well as the petitioner and the property owner to answer any questions.
Thank you. Does the petitioner like to?
Well, how do we get it? Big enough for everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Don Dykes. I'm with the law firm of Dykes Law Group, and I represent the property owner, Mr. Glenn Brist. The rezoning did arise from an enforcement action. He had purchased the property, I believe, originally as a site that he was looking to build a house and run a home office out of, including a landscape business and a plant nursery that's ancillary to that business. But decided he didn't, after buying the property, didn't particularly care to build a residence right there. And I'm going to show you some photos of the site in just a moment. So this is the general overview of the site. And right there in the center, the R2EO, that is the subject property. Immediately to the north is a 40 acre timbered site that belongs to Bethesda. It's currently, I believe, a CM zoning and not used by the Bethesda for any other purpose other than growing trees. On the opposite side of the road in the red is an R3. That's about 170 unit mobile home park. And then catty corner in the orange is a PUD that's zoned PUD BN. And I'll talk about BN in just a minute, but it has the Kroger and a gas station with a convenience store and some other retail stores directly kind of opposite the property. Now, when the enforcement action came up, we took a look at how to bring Mr. Brist into compliance and looked at rezoning options. For what he wanted to do on the site, there were two zoning districts that would permit that. One of them is a BN district. And coincidentally, the property kind of opposite it is also zoned as BN. But the other zoning district that would permit it was a RA zoning. So we made the election to downzone it. thinking that that would be a less intense use than a BN. Both of those uses would be permitted under either district, but the decision was made to downzone it. And at request of staff, we agreed to submit it as a PRA zoning and to limit our use to what was proposed in the plan, which is a landscape, it's a greenhouse nursery use. And so we thought that that would be one way to make it less intense and restrict the use. The properties that immediately surround it, it is zoned E, or rather R2EO, but the R2 zoning district applies for the other properties that are just to the south and the west. And the property to the south, which is down here, is a vacant lot. No houses there. The other property, R2 right here, 2 lots back there, but they are single family residence, one single family residence, same owner for both parcels. We were working at the time that this all came up on trying to figure out a way to close this road. And let me scroll down here and show you a plat of this property. But the property is bisected by an unopened section of road 50 foot wide, which is an extension of Lehigh Avenue and Bethesda Road. The access, the road does not serve as access to any other property. Just on paper it does, but it doesn't actually provide access. The one house back there that is located back in this section has a separate easement that comes across the neighboring parcel, not on our parcel, but the neighboring parcel, and that is his sole access into the property. There is an easement that is partly on our property, but that doesn't apply to the neighbor back there. So the neighbor, the one neighbor that's back there has access, and it's not through this unopened road. So we have approached the county about closing this road. There's a process to do that. The county looked at it a few years back for another request and said that there was one person back there that needed access. So that was the only reason they wouldn't close it. We think that we can satisfy that with the existing easement and perhaps granting a portion of our property as an easement to satisfy that. So we anticipate that we'll be able to satisfy the county and hopefully close that road. But in the meantime, it's unopened and it doesn't provide access to anyone. So that's why the decision was made to rezone both parcels. And just to give you a feel for the property, for those of you not familiar, the staff, Melissa, talked about the bus stop. There's the bus stop there right in front of the convenience store. Subject property begins back here at this pine tree down the road. And as we approach it, this is the property over here. It's grown up some since the picture was taken by Google. But there's a fence, and the fence is offset from the property line. The buffer has grown up already. This is the entrance to the mobile home park right there. Property is looking from this direction, is going back north. Mobile home park again over here on the right. This is the entrance to the subject property right here. And this would be kind of where the perspective is at the intersection of Lehigh and Ferguson. So what Mr. Briss proposes to do, and let me see, is to construct a building there to house his office and to provide storage for his business. He does store trucks there. These are the trucks that are currently in use. These are the trucks he uses and are presently stored at the site. And that includes this truck, and he does have a skid steer. So as part of the rezoning, we submitted a general development plan to go with it. And staff has recommended approval of at least the front portion of that with conditions. Now, the conditions were not anything that we discussed with them. It's not something that we offered as a concession. It's not something that, to my knowledge, that any neighbor has asked for. It's something that the county or MPC staff has come up with. And I want to take an opportunity to address those because we think that some of those are shouldn't be on this particular property. Now, we've indicated that we want to run a wholesale plant nursery out of there. We have no intention of doing retail sales, and we are willing to limit it to wholesale only, no retail sale. That's not the intent here. But when we get to hours of operation, that's very problematic. One, that would prohibit any office hours if he worked in the office after 6:30 p.m. If he's in there later than that, I mean, that's technically outside those office hours. Right now, the use is a lot of the staff, a lot of his workers leave, go to job sites. They work at the landings, they work on the islands, and they're gone all day. They bring equipment back at the end of the day. But to work on that equipment, they're going to have an office and a storage building. The ability to work on that equipment after those hours, we just think that's arbitrary. The county has a noise ordinance. We've got a vacant lot to the south. We've got a vacant lot to the north. We have a road to our east and a mobile home park, directly to the east that has the entrance right there. A lot of traffic, and we don't think that our use would disrupt the neighborhood. It would also prohibit uses in the event that there are storms or hurricanes. If we have storms, he quite frequently has to go help move things out of his client's property and to clean up, and that be a prohibition on it. We just think that it's arbitrary and unreasonable to put a restriction on that for the hours of operation. We have identified on the site plan where we would store equipment and materials, but the idea that that could be the only place that they can be put, I think this is a general development plan. We have not yet submitted a specific site plan, nor has that been approved. So we don't like the idea of that being part of the rezoning. There'll be a specific site plan that's approved, and that'll show where things will be stored at that time. Then there's item 4, the indoor storage shall only be used for other equipment. Okay. That's very inartfully drafted. I'm not sure what that's intended to do, but I know what it says. And I think the intent was to make sure that things were stored inside and not outside, but the way it's written, it limits the use of the property to storage of equipment. We can't run an office out of that. And again, I think, one, it's arbitrary. I don't think it's necessary, and I don't think it would limit the ability to use that office for any other purpose other than storage, the way it's written. So we'd ask for that to be stricken. Then we've got the requirement that we have a review and approval of a tree survey. Well, we're going to have to submit a specific site plan. There are tree guidelines the county already has. I'm not sure why we would be subject to more stringent requirements than any other applicant in our specific site plan. And so we would ask that that be stricken as a condition of the rezoning. And then there's a requirement there be no storage of waste that would attract vermin. Well, I'm not quite sure what that is. We don't store waste. It's a plant nursery, not a waste storage facility. They do have a dumpster that stays on site that's sent out weekly. I don't know if that's going to be considered storing waste that could attract vermin. I just think that again, the county has health codes and violations. I just don't think that should be attached to the rezoning itself as a condition. And then let's talk about the buffer. The specific, or rather the general development plan showed the required buffer, and it's a 15-foot buffer. Staff has proposed 25 foot, and we have an irregularly shaped lot to begin with. The buffer would apply to all sides of it, including the unopened roadside, and that would become part of the zoning. And let's take a look at what we've got a buffer statute or an ordinance that deals with buffers. And the intent of the buffer is to minimize adverse visual effects. And if you look down here, the buffer land uses into similar zoning districts which have a detrimental visual effect on each other. Now, the ordinance already has a minimum required buffer. Our plan proposes to meet that, but in addition to that, we don't think we should be required to have an additional 10-foot of buffer. And let me show you what we're up against. This is the Bethesda property that adjoins us to the north. Bethesda doesn't use it for anything but growing trees, but it's been a homeless encampment for years, and it continues to be a problem out there. This is a picture that was taken just a few weeks ago from that encampment. The fence that you see there on the left is the subject property. The fence that you see on the right picture, that is right at the property line, but that's the trash on Bethesda's side of the property and a path that the homeless have made coming in there. And then on the east side, on the Ferguson side, these are pictures from the property looking back across the street. On the left, we've got a mobile home that we've got, in disrepair. You can see the plywood that's exposed on the side of the house, a storage building that's fallen apart. We have a toilet in the yard and a Santa Claus hanging in the tree. We think what we're proposing to build there is not going to be visually detracting from our neighbors there. And so we don't think that anything other than what's required under the ordinance ought to be added on. Now, a couple of things that staff talked about the second parcel being too small for independent use. And I agree it is. It's too small for an independent use. And let me show you the survey once again. But we have a very small parcel that's irregularly shaped. It's a triangle, very narrow corners. If it's not rezoned with this, if that road is closed, we're going to have a split zoning. And then we're going to have to come back and rezone it to get a zoning that's consistent with the main use of the property. To me, it just doesn't make sense to split the zoning on that one piece that can't be used for anything else. And when the use is already an R2, which, if it could be used, it could be duplexes. It could be, a multifamily use. Staff also mentioned that you haven't seen, or they weren't able to see plants growing on the property. Well, at this point, they don't have water. They don't have power. No way to keep those things alive at this point. There is an existing well that was there. There's no pump. We looked at whether or not that could be operable again. Just don't know that yet, but that's why the current use doesn't include plants. They can't keep them alive at this point. So we request that the county or the MPC rezone this to the PRA per our submitted general development plan, but limit the restrictions that staff has imposed. And I'll run back through those very quickly again, but we're fine limiting the property to wholesale only, no retail sales. But beyond that, and I think there was also one that was not on the staff report, but was thrown at the last minute, which was no mulch or compost. Now, we don't have any problem with no composting. Yeah, composting isn't part of our business. It's not part of landscaping. We're not sticking stinky compost around people's flower beds or houses. But the mulch is. It's something that we do use, and I'm not sure the purpose of restricting that. There's not a health or safety or type of visual reason why that should be restricted. So, the restriction on no retail sales, and if you want to have a restriction on no composting, we're fine with that. But other than that, we don't think there should be any more requirements on there other than what are shown on our general development plan.
Thank you.
I have a question.
All right, go ahead.
So would you mind going back to your plot plan or plat?
Yeah, the plat or the general development plan?
Go up one right there. So you're not going to, or there's no intention of having an ingress or egress directly onto Ferguson. You would actually be going on to Bethesda Road and then accessing directly across from Lehigh?
It turns off of Ferguson onto the unopened portion of Lehigh.
Which is a county right of way, correct?
Which is a county right of way.
And your intent is to access it from that county right of way?
That's correct.
Okay. And the neighbor to your south, which is a vacant lot.
Yes.
I believe they use that access, that same unopened right of way, that first 40 feet to get into their property.
As well as Mr. Christensen.
In the back.
In the back,
in the very
uses
back.
the easement that's shown on there.
Okay. And the fenced in area that it has been fenced in, does it encompass part of lot 1 and lot 7, whatever the larger lot is?
I believe the fence is shown there.
I can't.
Let me see if I can.
So does it include both parcels?
I believe the fence does go across the unopened road, and it does go up the edge of the second parcel already and ties back into Bethesda's property. Is that correct? Okay.
Okay. And then the last comment right now is the composting. I mean, I think we need to be very careful. You said debris would not be left on site, but should he be coming in at 6:30 at night with a truckload of palmetto fronds and then it says no composting? I just think go to the list again, number 12, slide 12. The storage of waste. I think we need to be careful about how we word that. Should we put that in there that, long-term storage of waste maybe, but there will be waste on the property unless he's going to go to the dump before he comes to the site.
Well, there is a dumpster there.
So he will be placing all of his lawn debris after a job in a dumpster?
Do you have lawn debris?
From time to time we do recycle it, evergreen.
Correct.
But it is disposed on a regular basis. I do not store for any long period of time. Sometimes weather conditions do not permit us to get on that facility.
Can you step up to the?
Apologize.
Just state your name.
Glenn Brist. Sometimes weather conditions do not permit us to go out there. I mean, you get stuck, it does damage to your vehicle, so we opt to wait on it to dry out, but we do have a regular rotation of removing debris from the property. There's no significant amount of debris remaining on the property at any time.
Okay. And to go back up to item number 2, I would assume that in the summertime, especially after storms, you may be out till dark or just after dark, just getting the lawns done and coming in. Is that correct?
Possibly, yes. But
so what is the average time, or what's the latest that you're on site?
I try to be reasonable. Working crews 7:30 to 5:30-ish. It's usually around that time. But as far as my work, my office staff's type work, things like that, they might. I was on the phone with my assistant at 9 o'clock last night. So but it was an assistant type office.
And you may be repairing equipment late at night to have it ready in the morning, I would assume.
We don't do a lot of repairs. I'm not going to say we won't repair things, but we, usually that's usually done by a mechanic off site.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Kegler.
Yes, I want to address a couple issues there. You indicated that you're here because of enforcement action, and
yes, sir.
I've received those complaints. One of the issues we've got is, well, I think that, having an office there, I'm not sure we've got any issues with that, but we have received complaints about the storage of, mulch piles on site. And I think we're going to have an issue with that. We really want, and we are stepping up our enforcement actions in that area, with the trailer park and some other non-conforming uses out there. But I want to indicate the mulch piles, we're going to have an issue with that. We'd like to have your equipment in a storage warehouse or something like that. And I think you say you're going to do that. I think what staff was doing when they talked about no storage of waste that would attract vermin, they were also they were talking about mulch piles and compost piles. So I want to make sure that we're clear with that. And the vegetative buffer, we'd like to see that if we could.
But with respect to vegetative buffer, the plan, the general development plan that was attached to the petition shows a vegetative buffer, but it's 15 foot. 15. And that's what's required under the ordinance. What staff had requested or recommended, but there'd be an additional 10 foot on that, so a 25-foot buffer.
And that's, you know, I'm kind of agreeing with staff on that. I think one of the issues we've been having is when you change it from that residential designation to you going into almost like a commercial designation, having that buffer where it's out of sight, out of mind would help the situation out tremendously.
Well, I appreciate that, but we're proposing a 15-foot vegetative buffer. There's a fence, and a lot of this is going to be stored away from the road, is shown on the general development plan behind the building. And the neighbors to the north, you know, is a undeveloped lot. Mm-hmm. Bethesda's indicated, and we've talked to all of our neighbors. I talked to Mike Hughes again today at Bethesda. He called me to see if he needed to come. Has no objection to it at all. They ultimately look at developing that as multifamily. The neighbor to the south, Mr. Wheelis, has no objection. We've talked to him about it. Mr. Christensen has been very supportive of it, has no objection to it. None of our neighbors around us have any complaints, and we've been it came up as an enforcement action. They've been operating for 2 years, and the neighbors around them haven't complained, and I'm not sure.
Well, it may not be the neighbor directly adjacent to them, but we have gotten complaints, and we've got to look a little broader than the neighbor next door, and that's what I'm saying.
Right.
Thank you, Mr. Kegler. Mr. Woody?
The buffer. Right now the buffer is 25 feet requested, 25 feet right. Circumferential around all 3 sides of that triangular property. Is there a problem with a 25-foot buffer along the Ferguson Avenue and then 15 feet around the back 2 sides of that property?
I mean, it eliminates the use of the property.
It just eats into the usable space, and it's in addition to what's already in the ordinance. I mean, the ordinance already addresses that, and I'm not sure why, if the ordinance addresses what the buffer should be, that we should be required an additional buffer. And I'm not sure. Again, we're talking about having to carry that around per the zoning, if this is attached to the zoning, on the rear of the property, that leg that goes up the unopened road. When his property's on the other side of the unopened road, we're going to have to, again, eat into.
All right. Ultimately, it seems as though that portion of Lehigh that's not being used will be probably, which I don't speak for the county, obviously abandoned by the county. You end up recombining this to one large piece of property, and now you have a different situation with the buffers. That buffer will go away on those sides that are along that 50-foot easement.
They would still be on the north and the southwest.
Right. Mm-hmm. Right. Okay. I'm just curious about whether or not 15 foot would be good on that side, on the other side versus up against the road.
Well, the plan proposes the 15 feet, I know, up against Bethesda and 15 along Ferguson.
So I have a concern that we may be putting the cart before the horse, trying to rezone that sliver parcel before the unopened right-of-way has been granted. I agree with staff that we shouldn't be doing anything with that until that issue is resolved. But I also agree with you that many of these points that have been presented are way too vague to really be enforceable anyway. So I get why staff had these thoughts, and they're trying to address probably a lot of the concerns that have been addressed to the county by other residents in the area. But I think that a lot of this would be hard to go before a judge and try to explain the details of this being a legal definition. So I agree that several of these points have some concerns for me.
Mr. Stevens?
I just want to get some clarification. So with the road that may or may not be abandoned and closed off, is the 10,000 with the 1,001, is that currently under y'all's ownership?
It is.
Okay.
It's same ownership.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure. Thank you.
And just to address that, there's an old recorded plat, and that I'll just tell you, there's been lawsuits over the decades over that road, and we see them in the chain of title. And what happened is people would try to get the county to open the road. The counties refused to open the road. They've used an alternative route in, and I think that's the route that's shown on our most recent one that runs on the neighbor to the south of us. But others have sued. There's another lawsuit by another neighbor further down Ferguson that wanted to be able to drive up there, and easements were carved out because the road was unopened, because the Lehigh Avenue was unopened. So it's been unopened for a long time. There are very, very large oak trees in the road. Yeah, so it's been, inactive for a long time, and hopefully we can get it closed. We believe we can satisfy the county that Mr. Christensen back there has access, and it would be perfectly protected.
Ms. Bowles?
My question is related specifically to that, just to be on the record to say that my concern was about emergency services for those people on the back of the road, right? So it doesn't, because it's not open, it doesn't look like fire, police, whatever, it's accessible. That's one thing for the record. The other thing, if you could answer, how many employees and how many trucks do you have currently?
Good question.
We have roughly 8 employees. Eight employees and six trucks on site, 2 skid steers.
And so what hours of operation are you suggesting? Because the hours of operation that you said you typically run are shorter than hours that are being
right. But if I'm limited to my office staff can't work in their office at 6:45, I mean I don't want a violation because of something of that nature. There's certain times of the month, billing times, where things are a lot more goes on than just a simple 6 to 8 hour day. So I wouldn't want to be limited just to that. In the event of an emergency, we do run across, in my business, we do have various, a 25 mile an hour wind at Skidaway Island is an insane amount of cleanup, and it takes longer hours than maybe, a standard hour time, those standard hours of the day. It's not always, but I'd just rather not be limited to that.
So typically, what are those emergency hours?
We would come in, like I said, we normally start at 7:30 ish. I usually have my main manager. He'll be there probably 7 o'clock. In our men, I have to be reasonable with the men. You work guys 12, 14 hours a day. You don't have guys to work for you. You don't have people to work for you anymore. So I try to be reasonable with that. But like I said, in the event there is an emergency, some type of issue, we have to work till the work's finished. I'm not working to midnight. I'm not physically, nobody wants to do that. So I don't feel like that'd be an issue, but we don't want to be limited and not be able to do after hours work as far as like interior, inside staff, and maybe actually having to work on something inside an enclosed garage. So that's kind of where we're worried about the 6:30 to 6:30 issue.
It sounds like it needs to be a separation between office staff versus landscaping staff. Because the emergencies, when you use the landscaping staff, office hours, you don't want to run trucks past normal business hours when there's not an emergency, but then you want to be able to use the office staff past the emergency. Maybe that needs to be a separation.
Mr. Noah?
I can address the comment about emergency access because of my prior occupation. We had several calls in the rear property, Mr. Christensen, and we have never attempted, nor did we ever use this unopened right of way. It has its own, whether it's documented or not, there's good access to the back.
And I'll just show this to you quickly. Mr. Christensen is actually closer to Whitfield Avenue. Now he's right here. And this is Whitfield Avenue right here. He's closer to Whitfield Avenue. And the property that is right next door to him is accessed from Whitfield Avenue. I never worked for the fire department, but I think if somebody needed to get a fire truck in there, they might be trying to come off that way. It's a lot more open.
Mr. Kegler?
I want to applaud staff for trying to come up with some recommendations to kind of move this along. But I think I agree that they're kind of vague, and I think we need a little more work on some of those conditions. I think we can get to where the applicant needs to be, but I think we need to work on the conditions because they're not going to stand as they are. And I think having moved forward without conditions is not going to be acceptable either. So
you're suggesting maybe a continuance?
I would.
We do have one speaker, but Ms. Wood left already. Would you be amenable to a continuance?
Well, we could do that. Is there a reason why we can't if we knew kind of which ones that the staff have?
Well, I think some discussion with staff and discussion with the county engineer may affect some of those changes. So, just a continuance so MPC staff can kind of consult with county staff and see where we are with some of those conditions.
Okay.
Mr. Kegler, would that prohibit the county from continuing to enforce any kind of violations until that decision can be made?
Well, we still going to enforce. He's operating illegally right now, so that's an issue. But I don't think pushing to the next meeting is going to stop anything.
And
it might give you an opportunity to also talk with the county and find out whether there is an opportunity to include that other property with the abandonment of the right of way.
Well, I don't think we can get the right of way issue resolved by the next meeting, but maybe what I could suggest is that is conditioned on the closure of that road.
Talking with staff, maybe you can work some of that out. We don't have any speakers.
Do we have a date for the next meeting?
I think we need a motion. Either that or we need for the applicant to request a continuance.
Yeah, we would request a continuance this time, the next meeting.
Okay.
Cole's motion to continue this item to the next meeting, which is, we need a date for that. Sally, do you have a date for next meeting?
Could I interject that if we can make significant progress by the next meeting, there's no need for him to come waste their time if we still got issues to address.
He can always withdraw, right?
All right. Cole's make the motion that we continue this item until the next meeting on November 28th, provided that the county and MPC staff have come to terms with the applicant.
No, a second.
All right. I'm going to do a voice vote on this if you're okay with that. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you.
Hi, Anna McCory with the MPC. I'm going to be presenting the staff report for 505 West 36th Street.
My apologies. That is our next regular business. Comprehensive Plan Future Land Use Map Amendment at 505 West 36th Street. including, and after that, a map amendment request to rezone from TR1 to TC1 505 West 36. I'm assuming you're going to want to kind of get them together. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
So I'll be presenting the staff report, and then we have representatives from City of Savannah and Historic Savannah Foundation here as well. All right. So I will start off with the rezoning. So the petitioners are requesting, sorry, let me bring it up. All right. So the petitioner requests rezoning of the property at 505 West 36th Street from a traditional residential 1 or TR1 zoning classification to traditional commercial 1, TC1 zoning classification in association with the proposed use of the property as a museum. The property is about 0.1 acres, and it's going to be restored as an African American Historic and Cultural Arts Museum with a renovated carriage house. This property is also known as the Kia House. And so the Kia House is a residential building. It was originally constructed in 1910. It was the residence of Dr. Calvin L. Kia and Virginia Kia, and it was one of the first African American museums in Savannah. The museum was opened in the residential structure by Virginia Kia in 1959 and closed in 2001 once she passed. So both the main building and carriage house have been unoccupied and deteriorating since the closure. This parcel is in the Kyler Brownville Historic District as well. And this is one of Savannah's oldest African American neighborhoods. As of 2021, both structures are listed as contributing resources to the district. And so I think this block of text from the Georgia Trust for Historic Preservation gives you some context into the property. So notable visitors included civil rights activist Rosa Parks and artist Margaret Burroughs. Originally a prairie-style home, Virginia Kia put a 2-story addition on the front with a full wall of windows to accommodate the museum. Unoccupied and in probate for nearly 20 years, the house is in advanced state of deterioration, which has not gone unnoticed by the city. Due to issues surrounding the probate, concerned citizens have been unable to apply for grants, conduct archaeological research, or perform any maintenance to the property. There's strong community support for the preservation and recognition of this resource, yet the house remains in danger of being lost. So the Historic Savannah Foundation hopes to restore the house to its use as a museum, and any construction, demolition, or renovation will be needed to be reviewed by the Historic Preservation Commission, and any other exterior work will be reviewed by Historic Preservation staff. As a note, they are on the agenda for the Historic Preservation Commission for later this month. All right, so a couple things about the rezoning. It is TR1, but to the east, it is surrounded by TC1 as well, so traditional commercial as well. So it would serve as a nice transition between the two. The petitioners did speak to the executive committee of the Kyler Brownville Neighborhood Association in October because the neighborhood association meeting, I think, is tomorrow, and they have general support for this here. And then the area is served by multiple Chatham area transit bus stops. There are about 4 within 0.1 miles. It's also located along Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard, which is a minor arterial road, so it has really good access. It does fit some characteristics of the traditional commercial district. All right, and so as you all know, this rezoning request was filed concurrently with a request to amend the future land use map. So at the time of the request, the subject parcel is not designated as traditional neighborhood, which is identified by the comprehensive plan for residential areas close to downtown or an outlying historically settled area. Right, so this category includes non-residential uses that are compatible with the residential character of the neighborhoods. So the requested amendment to traditional commercial represents an effort to realign the future use of its parcel with its historic use as an African American culture and arts museum dating back to 1959. This traditional commercial district includes commercial uses that should be compatible with the character and scale of adjacent neighborhoods, most often found along collectors and arterials. Characteristics include walkability, limited or on-street parking, multi-tenant retail, and the property is adjacent to a traditional commercial district on the future land use map. So the main difference here between TR1 and TC1 is that a museum is not an allowed use in TR1, so that's why there's a rezoning request. And with this rezoning, we need the future land use map request to traditional commercial as well. All right, and so right now, the range of uses permitted in the TC1 zoning district is more appropriate for the restored use of the site as a museum than those in TR1. Approval of the petition should be conditional on development in accordance with the conceptual plan provided for zoning review. Any future change would require approval of the Planning Commission and City Council. Obviously, historic preservation and cultural resources is a priority for the city of Savannah, and this parcel is in the College-Brownville Historic District. It demonstrates significance of preserving the historic structure on the property. The proposed development is likely to have a less adverse impact on the neighborhood than the current use as an unoccupied and deteriorating building. This proposed use, as presented, is consistent with the existing historic pattern of development in the neighborhood and surrounding area. And the structure has not been maintained in the historic Savannah Foundation hopes to restore the building to its use as a African American cultural and arts museum, and with the support of the city of Savannah. The building carriage house are severely deteriorating. Without intervention, the buildings may be lost and beyond repair. So this is consistent with the comprehensive plan to promote and support reinvestment in older and historic places as a key component of community resilience. And the subject parcel is a residential home that was converted to a museum. The building cannot be restored for the purpose of the historic use in the current zoning district. However, the home and parcel could have reasonable use as a residence. There are adequate city services available to the property. The only concern is the parking availability. The petitioner will need to provide 1 parking space per 400 square feet with a minimum of 5 spaces. The lot currently has 2 parking spaces in the back, so they'll need to provide 3 more spaces at a minimum. The building is almost 3,000 square feet and the carriage house is a little over 900 square feet. If the entire building is used as a museum, excluding the carriage house, 7 spaces will be required. And also provide bicycle parking as well. There is ample street parking available around the property. And so essentially the Historic Savannah Foundation and City of Savannah will work together to restore the property for its use as a museum. If rezoned to TC1, it should be under the condition that it will be restricted to a museum to ensure the building will be restored to its historic use. Looking at new plans that have been recently submitted and are part of the Historic Preservation Commission application are to include apartments as well, so that to demolish the carriage house. I'm sure that the petitioners can speak more to this, but they had it reviewed by an engineer who said it's not structurally sound. So that carriage house will be demolished and 2 apartments will be added. So we recommend approval to request the rezone with the following conditions: that the Kia house be preserved and the allowed uses in TC1 are museum and apartments, which are both allowed in the zoning ordinance. And so the future land use map, we've covered a lot of the similar things with the future land use map change. I'm just going to bring up that report. All right, and so just specifically, because these will be 2 separate votes, the future land use map change request at the property is from a traditional residential designation to traditional commercial, and for the reasons stated in the rezoning application or report as well. And so we recommend approval of the Flume amendment to traditional commercial. And I will show you just a few photos of the property. Great. So here we can see a before and after, essentially. So in the 1960s on the left versus now on the right, it's boarded up, it's deteriorating. So I think it would be a really big asset to have this renovated and used as a museum for its historic use.
Thank you. Is the applicant, is there an applicant that's going to? Ms. Liddy, please state your name.
Good afternoon, Bridget Liddy, Director of Planning and Urban Design with the City of Savannah. Good afternoon, everybody. This represents a very exciting time for Savannah, where we're really going back and recognizing African-American history in our neighborhoods. I appreciate the history that you gave, but just a quick overview. Recently, what's been happening with the property is that in 2022, there was a historic marker that was placed celebrating the contributions of the individuals that lived there as a museum. In September of this year, if you didn't see it in the paper, the City of Savannah approved an agreement where we would be providing $500,000 to support the redevelopment of the structure as a museum to celebrate the African-American culture that was there, as well as provide some artist housing, which is fantastic. So with that being said, we're very excited about moving forward with this and making it happen and doing it the right way with the future land use map change, as well as with the rezoning. And I appreciate the addition of the apartment use as something that is part of the conditions. I don't have anything else to say, except for one thing. With the Kaya House, the petitioner currently now is the Historic Savannah Foundation. The property recently transferred as of last week. So we're working with the new property owner, who is the Gavin Foundation, and they will be listing this as the Kaya House Museum, Inc. when it goes to mayor and council as far as the actual property owner.
Thank you.
Sure.
Any questions for Ms. Liddy or staff?
Madam Chair.
Go ahead, Mr.
Really excited about this project, excited about the recommendations. I do want to highlight Historic Savannah Foundation's continued fantastic work to preserve historic homes, and now very important culturally historic homes as well. The Galvin Foundation, who has been a tremendous partner on this effort, and thank City Council for their endorsement as well, and approval and leadership on the issue. I do want to make certain, because I know in the written materials the use is limited to a museum, but I do want to be certain that the staff recommendation, if that's what would be voting on, includes the use of apartments or residences in a carriage house that would be affordable housing as well. I just want to make certain that that's included, or do we need to add it? Okay, great. Thank you.
We'll count on you, Mr. Melder.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right. And Mr. Any question, any more comments? Mr. Yarls had wanted to speak.
My name is Ryan Jarls, Director of Preservation for Historic Savannah Foundation. We just want to reiterate all the words that Mr. Melder and Ms. Liddy stated, and then just to add a few things that might quell any concerns if they exist. Hopefully they don't. But we do, when we sell a property through our revolving fund, which is what this property was sold through, we have attached an easement with this property in perpetuity, which does require the museum use, and it does require the maintenance of the property. And with that sale, we also included a 10-year affordability covenant. So that singular apartment that is proposed in the carriage house will be required to follow the affordability covenants for the first 10 years. And hopefully they will continue that beyond that use. But we just want to thank Ms. Liddy for her petition and thank the City of Savannah for their inclusion of this property. Thank you.
Thanks. Any comments? Go ahead, Mr. Stevens.
I just want to kind of echo what Mr. Melder said. I fully applaud everybody that's been involved in these type of efforts, and I hope that we see more of these throughout the city to continue to capture, and not only capture, retain, maintain, and tell the whole story of our city.
Any other comments? All right, we're going to have to take these motions separately. First, the comprehensive future plan, future land use map amendment. Do I have a motion?
Madam Chair, I make a motion to approve the future land use map amendment from traditional residential to traditional commercial.
Cole, second.
All right, any discussion? All right. Going to do a voice vote? Okay. All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Thank you. Okay. Now on the map amendment request to rezone from TR1 to TC1, 505 West 36th Street.
Madam Chair, I make a motion to approve the request to rezone to traditional commercial with the following conditions. One, that the historic Kai House shall be preserved. Two, that there will be a use as a museum and appropriate apartments in the carriage house.
Cole, second.
All right. Any discussion? All right. Let's do a voice vote on this one too. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Good deal. At this last two also comprehensive future land use map amendment and map amendment request to rezone. 2025 Texas Avenue map amendment and rezone from RSF 6 to RSF 5.
Sorry about that. Bring you back to Texas Avenue. Here we go. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the commission. Thank you for persevering. I know it has been a sprint. Okay, so I just wanted to take a moment to bring the subject parcel kind of into your, just to kind of let you know where we are. So here's Savannah downtown, and you can see that we're in an area that is kind of south and east of town, but still very much in town, right? So we're out here in what are currently designated as suburban single family for the purpose of housing. A lot of this here, if it doesn't actually have some sort of institutional or non-residential use on it. So just to give you some context as to where we are. At present, I'm going to speak to you about a combination future land use map amendment and a request to rezone. The first one is the future land use map amendment, which is a request to amend the map from residential suburban single family to residential single family. And this is requested for the purpose purely because the Savannah zoning ordinance requires strict consistency. There are certain zoning designations that are required to have a particular future land use map category. And so this is one of those. These are actually both single family detached future land use designations. So in essence, they are more or less the same. The current one requiring or allowing a maximum gross density of 5 units per acre. The other one, again, as this is in town, up to 8 gross units per acre. And so I think the big takeaway from this one really, as a board and as we continue to kind of look at how the city can posture itself to genuinely, contextually, sensitively address the legitimate housing shortage that we have, this is one of those opportunities where when we bring back the map and we start to say, hey, do you remember all of these different cases that we addressed along the way? We can now go back to those neighborhoods and we can designate places where we can say, maybe we do need a different zoning framework. And so this is one of those where I would say it has currently a single family detached, which may be the most appropriate framework. If this is an area that we feel that the single family attached approach is the way to resolve housing in this area, and that's consistent with the development pattern, then we may want to look at things like very specific tweaks on our accessory dwelling unit ordinance to say, rather than 1 unit in 700 square feet, we're going to allow 2 bedrooms, and 800 square feet or 950 square feet, something to that effect. So just finding an appropriate solution given the context. So that's kind of what this analysis gets at. You can see here the subject parcel outlined in blue, and it's kind of a mixture, but still, you definitely get the single family detached is present here. And so most of the lots, you can see that they reflect having been combined with at least one other lot. These are lots that were 35 feet initially. Here are a couple of them. If you can see my mouse pointer right here, they still kind of, well, actually that one looks a little bigger. It's 40 something, but this is 35. And so the lot at 2025 Texas, you can see consists of 3 of the traditional lots. And so most of these are either 1, 2, or 3 lots. So a lot has been happening kind of in the past. And the petitioners have come along and they have an interest in subdividing this. And it should be relatively straightforward. But because of the future land use map and the current zoning, they ran into this issue. And so the present request necessitates, because the current zoning, let me not jump into that just yet. I have gotten ahead of myself. Let me actually go through these because I think they're important. The relationship of the proposed amendment, this is actually a relatively minor adjustment that is required, again, because of consistency. This, I think, is what's really beneficial. You guys have heard the name Laura McKinnon from Housing Savannah today because, again, you're going to start to hear her name more. I think her organization is going to be critical, in terms of helping get all of the different agencies that have a small part in regulating housing here on board. So from the Housing Savannah Action Plan, one of the recommendations, this is actually, again, I've jumped ahead. This is our own plan 2040. Housing Strategy 3.3, adopt policies and ordinances that allow for a wider variety of housing types to be built in existing neighborhoods. So this would allow just that. And then jumping to the next section. So other professional planning principles and standards, again, this is the Housing Savannah Action Plan 4.3 is the task item. Increase the capacity and or number of nonprofit CDC and private developers of new or renovated single family properties. These petitioners happen to be small local investors that are kind of just getting started. They're very eager and they would like to kind of parlay this into additional opportunities. So they are not trying to, by any means, sort of extract as much as they can. They are coming in parcel by parcel, looking at unique individual opportunities. And so this is one of those Housing Savannah strategies that we can support with this particular petition. MPC staff has been informed of productive exchanges, and we also did receive letters from some of the neighbors who were in support. And so with that, we recommend approval of the flume request. I'm going to hop over to the rezoning where you'll see a different one. Again, the subject property zone RSF 6, and the request is to rezone to RSF 5. Now, RSF stands for residential single family, and the 5, 6, 10, 20, those designate the minimum lot area, right? So RSF 6 currently means that it is required to have 6,000 square feet of land area, and that equates to a 60-foot frontage with 100 foot of depth. Okay, and so the request is to make this RSF 5 to have 50 foot of frontage at 100 foot depth for the purpose of dividing these 2 lots. And in essence, you are going to end up with 2 lots that are conforming within the RSF 5 zoning district, permitting the development of 2 single family homes, 1 on each lot. The site is approximately 10,500 square feet, 0.241 acres, and it contains a single family home that was built in 1939. It is legal non-conforming with regard to front and side setbacks. Looking at the surrounding development pattern, you have largely single family dwellings. There's also a church that is within this same block, but the zoning is all RSF 6. So that is the one kind of unique circumstance about this. You would have RSF 5 zoned parcels that still look very much like the RSF 6 counterparts all around them. Here is an image of the plat itself. So this is the existing residence that you see right here. And you can see this is the front setback line, and it encroaches into that, and it also encroaches over here on the side. So that's those encroachments. But ultimately, what's important today is that they want to divide this parcel, and you're going to end up with the original parcel having 50 foot of frontage, and it is 100 feet even in depth. And the new lot that is going to be created with your approval and that of the city council would be 55 feet by 100. And again, here's your building envelope for the proposed single family home that would go right next door. And here you can kind of see that in its context. You know, on the map, you wouldn't think there was any issue with that. This is just one of those matters of policy, where as we encounter these situations, we can sort of take note of them and again, come back when we address those broad blanket efforts to shore up some of our deficiencies. Again, with regard to neighborhood meetings, we did receive letters of support. We understand that the District 3 Alderwoman took a tour of the property and seemed to be in support of this as well. A request was made of the neighborhood association, but the petitioner did not receive any response back from them. So, but due effort was made in accordance with the requirements of the zoning ordinance. There is sufficient public facilities in order to serve the property, but any deficiencies that are there would be required to be addressed within the building permit review process. With regard to transportation and transit, there are CAT bus stops that are accessible along Pennsylvania Avenue about 600 feet away, and there are sidewalks along Pennsylvania Avenue. Again, this is concurrent with a future land use map amendment request, the existing and proposed zoning districts. And so getting down to suitability and community need, again, this is where looking at our policies and figuring out where these kind of idiosyncrasies can be addressed. Again, the uses permitted are exactly the same. This is just a matter of two different RSF districts that have different standards. And again, even the current flume suggests that this is a suburban single family style of development where perhaps, we need to more broadly consider adjusting the entire area so that it could have something that reflects the situation of this site in town. To jump down to consistency with your agreement with the future land use map amendment, this would be consistent, but also with regard to the policies of Plan 2040, again, adopting policies and ordinances to allow for a wide variety of housing types in existing neighborhoods. The subject parcel does have reasonable use as a single family home. And an ADU could be developed, but it would not be allowed to be subdivided and sold. So that is the one kind of distinction to be made here. With regard to policy analysis, we can see from that aerial view that most of these parcels do reflect having been combined, but there's a variety. There's not consistency in all of these parcels. There's definitely sort of a mixture of different developments that have happened in the past. And so this is contextually sensitive. This is actually a sketch of the proposed dwelling. So you can see what is proposed right next door. Little bungalow looking home. This would be the new unit. And with that, staff does recommend approval of the request to rezone, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Could I ask
a question for staff?
Can we get through the applicant first?
Okay.
There. No, after all,
I think it's a good idea.
I know everybody's ready to go home. So Todd Rodenberg, thank you to Mr. Morrow for a comprehensive presentation. We're happy to answer any questions.
All right, now time for questions. Go ahead.
Question for staff. It appears that there are three different lots, 18, 20, and 22. Am I correct?
Yes, sir.
And these would be lots of record. Am I correct?
That is correct.
What would prohibit a homeowner, and this is, I guess, for knowledge purposes only, from just splitting out lot 22 or whichever one is farthest from the home and having, you're really making lots less substandard. or were these recombined at any point into one lot, or are they just lots of record under one PIN number?
Mr. Noah, I have a feeling you know something because.
No, I don't. I'm asking you a question.
No, absolutely.
Right.
No, I'm saying this is an interesting circumstance that we've kind of been trying to navigate, the lots of record. And so to your point, there is a process that was created by the assessor's office. Correct. That is called recertification of existing lots of record. It is absolutely correct that they could go back if it was determined that these had been administratively combined for the purposes of, say, your tax bill.
Correct.
Right. But the distinction to be made there is that that's for tax purposes and not zoning. So the unique circumstance with recertified lots is that people come forward for zoning related requests with a tax combined or recertified lot in essence. So this is not something that came before a zoning board of appeals or something like that for the purpose of receiving a variance. It's something that was combined so that they got one bill, not because they came and did something to establish this. Nonetheless, you are correct, right? Under that process, they would be allowed to recertify that. And the place that we are at with that right now is that if someone came in for the purpose of attempting to build on a recertified lot, the lot itself would be regarded as conforming. The structure to be built on it, however, if it required any variances, it would be the structure that we would address. I hope that answers your question.
Correct. And I've done this in the past many times. Mm-hmm. And that's why I was wondering when a petitioner comes in and says, we really want to build two houses, do we give them, because I know it's very costly, it's both time, resources, money. Do we give them that opportunity or that suggestion? Hey, you have 3 lots, just peel one of them away and you don't have to go through this big process if they are lots of record.
I would say on a case-by-case basis, I may offer that suggestion. Under this suggestion, in the interest of trying to establish and sort of promote the development pattern of zoning, because we deal with zoning matters, I wouldn't necessarily feel at liberty to just kind of say to someone, hey, you should go this other route, generally speaking.
And I understand it's just today, for an example, we've heard several times that we've kind of directed a petitioner in a certain direction. I personally think that we should at least give them that knowledge and that opportunity. That's all I have.
Mr. Morrow, it's possible that they could go to the Zoning Board of Appeals and ask for a variance on those lots too, isn't it?
I guess if the structure that they were proposing was going to be non-conforming, they would need to approach it. But the thing that that allows a non-conforming lot of record to exist is the fact that it was platted during a previous zoning ordinance, during a previous zoning regime. So it is legal and valid, but no one built on it. And I'm sorry if I'm belaboring this, but if you recall, the gentleman who came in for the marsh buffer variance, and we kind of, it was a variance. It wasn't this board. I'm so sorry. It's an existing lot that you didn't build on for whatever reason. And so now you kind of want to cash in on it. And that's what kind of creates that, and so it's taken some working to figure out how is it that we navigate this process? Because again, these look like non-conforming lots for zoning purposes.
I've seen them navigated that way a few times in the Zoning Board of Appeals.
I know that the county specifically has direction, and I guess I was going down that road. Does the city have that? The county has ordinances that speak of substandard lots of record and lots of record. It's very spelled out. So.
The city and the county do both have those provisions.
So who does the recertification?
So MPC staff receives a recertification plat. And at that point, we evaluate it. It has to bear the language, this is a recertification plat for X, Y, and Z, and we would approve it based on that. Yes, sir.
And last comment, I promise. And the only thing that would prohibit that recertification is if there were documentation that recombined them legally at some point. Am I correct?
That's correct.
All right. Any other questions? Any discussion?
Coles make the motion that we approve staff's recommendation from item 10, comprehensive plan future land use amendment for 2025 Texas Avenue.
Noah second.
Any discussion? Voice vote, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Now the map amendment.
Coles make the motion that we approve staff's recommendation for map amendment request to rezone from RSF6 to RS5 for 2025 Texas Avenue.
Noah second.
Any discussion? All right. Voice vote, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. So that is all of our items for today. We have no presentations. We do have other business. Ms. Wilson, could you share with us a little bit about that resolution for the upcoming updating MPC Bank of America authorizations?
Basically, the records that we have with the Bank of America still have former employees identified on the accounts. When I first got here, we had an employee that hadn't worked here in 25 years who was on the account. In fact, the credit card that was used was still in that person's name, and I immediately had to get that changed because she was like 80 years old. So we try to make sure we check that from time to time, and we found that these two former employees were still on the bank accounts. So I wanted to make sure that we removed these two and made sure that we added, and we'll do this periodically, that we added myself, and I'm already on there, Miss Everett and Miss Ward, who's the budget analyst.
All right. We need a vote on this, right? Okay. Any discussion? Any questions? Can I get a motion?
Coles motion to approve the resolution for updating MPC Bank of America authorizations.
Noah second.
All right. Voice vote.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. So that's it. Yes, please.
Coles make the motion that we adjourn to executive session.
Noah second.
So,
Coles make the motion to return from executive session.
no votes were taken. Personnel matters were discussed.
Coles second.
All right. Thank you, guys.